Hey guys, welcome to the channel. This is the sixth part of What If Issei Was Never Resurrected. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like the video. Also share this video with your friends. Let's start the video. Kokobiel, Rias called up to the fallen angel leader. Ah, it seems we have gotten some visitors to welcome us, he commented. I believe you are the group Crossel had warned us about. He looked to Issei and the others. And Rias Gramori, he recognized her, just the person I had hoped to meet. Of course I thought I would meet you at your home. We had already been warned about your attack. We have forces in place to stop you, Rias responded, bluffing. She knew that Azazel would very likely send someone, thanks to Raynor informing him beforehand. But whoever he sends would be heading to Kokobiel's fortress in Bulgaria, not Kuo. And until they found out about this attack here, it might be already too late. Really? Kokobiel replied. I would rather think that you and your friends here were involved in the assault on my base and had so found out about my planned attack here. But sadly it seems the strong being that you have brought with you is still occupied with this other powerful presence it has clashed with. Can that be? He smiled. Too bad. I would have really liked to know who these two are. Maybe it would have been something interesting for once. If you truly want to know, well, one of them is the god Odin from another reality and the other is his son Loki from our world, Raynor called out. They are probably still fighting with each other, she stated. The others were looking at her strangely. Why in the world had she actually bothered to tell him that? What? She asked, looking at her teammates. Oh really? Kokobiel asked grinning. You know Raynor. Under any other circumstances I would think you were just trying to make fun of me. But given what Crossel had told me about the group you have joined, I believe that actually possible. The question is, why are even telling me this? Can it be that this is just a desperate attempt to distract me? Yes. He smiled at her once again. You are just trying to buy time. Let me guess. You and your friends have somehow found out the location of my fortress and reported it to Azazel, like the loyal little girl that you always were. Maybe you even hoped that he would finally take you into his bed and give you what you always wanted. XXX at the last statement, Raynor actually felt herself blush, and she also saw the look that Issei was now sending to her in this moment. She wasn't quite sure what to say to him. We will talk about this later. He sends her a mental message. And she just nodded in return. Issei knew he could hardly blame her for having feelings for her leader, when he was in a relationship with her and Irina, and probably Asia as well, and was planning to build up a harem. XXX, but you didn't know about my planned attack on Kuo, Kokobiel continued. So nobody knows I am here right now. Am I close to the truth? Yes, I see, he said. To be honest, I had expected you to give everything that you have found out about me so far to the Grigori. That was the reason I stayed away from headquarters for the last weeks. I expected to be arrested as soon as I set foot in it. But now it is too late. When this here is over, we will all be back at war and Azazel and the other leaders will all have no other choice than to join me. Raynor, Donasek, Kalawarner, I give you one last chance. Follow me like the rest of the Grogori will soon. Or die here together with our enemies. Bastard, Kalawarner hissed. Kokobiel. Maybe I would have followed you before you had tried to have all of us killed, Donasek exclaimed. But now I know better. You don't give a damn about our race or anything else. You are our enemy. Still hang on the past I see. You just can't get over the fact that I had set you and your comrades up for the greater goal, right? Kokobiel commented sardonically. Of course I am hardly one to talk here, since I want to restart the Great War, right? He stated casually. Too bad. You had so much potential. If only nobody had interfered, then you and your team could have died as martyrs for my cause. Now you will just die as hindrances in my way. You, Donasek growled. That is the way you treat warriors who have trusted you? Issei asked disgusted. Oh boy, you understand so little, Kokobiel replied. Trust, loyalty, order, those concepts lost their meaning a long time ago. Ever since it happened, he said cryptically. All what is left to us is the war. And everybody who stands in my way will perish. My lord, leave these weaklings to me, Sartale stated. I will crush these insects while you can deal with our objective. If you insist, Kokobiel replied in a smooth voice. Sartale charged forward, forming light spears in both his hands, but he was nearly instantly intercepted by Issei, who blocked the way of the six-winged fallen angel to his comrades, just before he reached Calawarner, who he had been aiming for. And he parried his spears with his training sword, that he had augmented with his own key energy. A sacred gear user. If that is what you want, I will start with you. Boost. Issei heard Diedrag's voice inside his own mind. He was not yet using the new blade the Guardians had given him, yet. He knew its powers would be hard to control. And beside that, he intended to keep it as a trump card. Their weapons were still locked with each other. Boost. He heard it again and his power once again doubled. But Sartale, surprised by the strength of his opponent, released more of his power as well. Out of my way, human, he yelled, using his wings to fly up into the sky. Forget it, Issei shouted back. In this moment he activated his balance breaker. The dragon scale armor formed around his body and he felt his power growing even more, and he used his wings he possessed in this form to follow his opponent. He was now able to push the six-winged fallen backwards. Issei broke one of his light spears apart with his bare fists, much to the fallen's surprise, who was now falling back and going in the defensive. Right now another magic circle appeared on the ground below them and Sona Citri and her peerage, the other devil group in Kuo, had arrived. Ah, it seems we are all complete now, Kokobiel stated as he saw their arrival. Kokobiel, Sona said quietly as she recognized him. She and the others had felt the foreign presences at the town border and came to check on it. The presence of one of the leaders of the Grigori, however, intimidated even her. Meanwhile, the fight between the Red Dragon Emperor and the fallen angel officer continued. Damn it, Issei thought. While he outmatched his opponent in this form, he was simply wasting too much of his energy for it, that he needed to spare for Kokobiel himself. This guy was not even the real enemy. He decided to risk it and vanished the training's weapon, and instead the sword of Cronus appeared in his hand. Like before, the new blade parried another attack from Sartale's light spears. But using it as a simple weapon would not be enough, he knew. Then he could have also kept the other sword. He tried to activate its power. Like Gariel and Darien had taught him to do it, he used his mind to reach out to it. A moment later he felt the weapon responding. He took another swing at his opponent and this time it was he who was blocked by the light spears. But to his and everyone's complete surprise, Sartale's froze. For a moment it looked as if a blade made a bright light pass through his body and then suddenly blood began flowing in a straight line on his upper body and a large gaping wound was opening, and then suddenly, the fallen angel's body drifted apart, cleanly cut into two halves at his upper chest. Sartale's decimated form fell to the ground to Issei's feet, who had just fulfilled the movement and made a full swing with his blade. What the hell? Someone called out. He believed it was Saji, one of the members of Sona's peerage. What in the world had just happened? Akeno questioned. How is that possible? Zenobia asked. Of course, the sword of Cronus, Gariel realized. The Titan of Time. This weapon manifests part of his power. Its attacks can move through the time-space continuum, directed by the mind of the Wilder. And that means? Irina questioned. It can cut through time and space, Gariel responded. The attack cut his opponent before Issei actually made the strike. They all were staring at Issei in fascination. Kokobiel reacted in a way none of them would have expected. He started to chuckle. Indeed, a very interesting weapon, he stated. This fight might actually be a worthwhile. You don't seem to be very concerned that your subordinate is dead, Issei remarked. Sartale was a fanatic and a fool, Kokobiel replied. It is not a great loss. A fool, a fanatic. And what do you think you are then? Rias asked him. Something completely different, as you all will find out very soon. Dozens of light spears, all over 2 meters long, materialized in the air around him, and then shot in their direction in incredible speed. Gariel, Raynor and Donasek reacted in the same way. They just phased, shifted their molecules partly out of this dimension and so made themselves temporally intangible. Donasek had shown an especially great talent for this technique. He could stay in phase for over 2 minutes in some cases, despite that he had just learned this technique a week ago, and let the light spears just pass through his body. Raynor, whose talents lied more with key manipulation and telepathy, she was able to stay intangible for maybe 20 or 30 seconds so far, but she was getting better, was doing the same thing, but also dodged the attack at the same time instead of just trusting on the phase technique. Issei, who knew the technique as well, could have done the same thing. But being who he was, he decided to shield Murayama and Irina instead and block the spears heading in their direction. In opposite to the fallen angels, the human without sacred gear in their group, who had harder access to their supernatural potential, had not fully learned this technique yet. Zenobia stopped one of the coming spears with her Durandal, that she had just summoned. Ravel was hit by one of the spears but healed near instantly thanks to her regeneration. Kiba activated his own sacred gear sword birth, to summon dozens of weapons on his own, that he sends flying against the light spears to stop as many of them as he could. So he managed to protect himself and the rest of his peerage and also Kalawarner and a few members of Sonas from the worst of the onslaught. Other members of the C-Tree peerage however had less luck. The Rook Yura was hit right into a stomach. Rhea Kusaka, one of Sona's bishops, had her leg pierced and nearly cut off. Yes, Kokobiel said in glee, what a brilliant set of abilities you have. Even if of course none of you is even close to my level, this might still turn out to be an interesting fight. And a good start for my new war. XXXXXXX Bulgaria. A half-world away the fight between the two gods was still going on. And they both had more or less started to go all out. Loki was in this moment began another onslaught of attacks from the sky, that literally led a rain of fire and energy down to the ground that burned away everything it hit. Odin, who was currently standing on the ground beneath him, used his power to shield himself and most of the surrounding area, but not all of it. Some places in greater distance that Odin was no longer able to shield were his and turned into a blazing inferno. One of the locations that were hit was Kokobiel's now deserted castle, that nearly instantly vanished in a large pillar of fire. I admit you are good, father, Loki stated. I am impressed. But you won't be able to keep fighting me and protect the land around us at the same time. I fear if you continue like this you will lose. But if you insist. He fired another blast of energy. This one directed at a small town close by. Odin however teleported himself right in front of the blast, caught it and redirected it like he did it before. This time however he sends it flying right back at Loki. The trickster god in turn avoided the attack. Damn it, he thought. He knew he needed to come up with an idea and that quickly. Odin, despite everything else, was stronger than him. And this version, he admitted now, seemed even tougher than the father he knew. And this one didn't seem to have the weakness of being a perverted fool. In this moment two other figures arrived at the battlefield. It was Azazel and Valley Lucifer. Odin, the fallen angel leader, asked surprised as he saw the two gods. Yes, but not exactly the one who you know. I guess you are Azazel of this reality, he replied. And Valley Lucifer is, if my information is correct, the White Dragon Emperor. This reality, Azazel repeated. I guess you came here with Raynor and the others, he inquired. Yes. Interesting. You realize of course that I cannot trust you blindly on your word on this, Azazel stated. Even if you claim to be an ally. Of course, the god replied. Loki at the same time was more than shocked at the arrival of the two newcomers. All four of them were watching each other carefully, not sure who to trust. Anyway, Azazel continued, Valley Lucifer and myself are trying to find a certain castle in this area and we have certain business there. I know about the message Raynor has sent you, Odin told him. This matter however seemed to have already solved itself. By what I have seen, one of Loki's attacks had hit the castle and obliterated it. Kokobiel however had left before that happened and I am not sure where. I see you are truly who you claim to be if you know this, Azazel said. Loki meanwhile knew that he was in a bad situation. First an even more dangerous version of his father and now the general governor of the fallen angels and on top of that the damned Hakuryuko. If these three would team up against him, and now it definitely seemed to look that way, he knew he had absolutely no chance. He cursed that idiot Crossel for ever convincing him of this venture here. But the price he had offered was simply too good. A chance to start Ragnarok right away, without even the need to get rid of Odin first. Right now however he was just charging up another attack, and prepared to send it down to the three. It wouldn't even matter what, or who he hit, as long as he distracted them for a moment to get the hell away from here. And Crossel should better hope to die in this fight, he thought. Otherwise, He would regret it if he ever got his hands on him. But before he could unleash the blast, Odin, who had been floating next to Azazel, suddenly disappeared and teleported right before him. Before the surprised Loki could react, he delivers a combination of high-level lightning and pure energy at him, that he channeled through his spear. Loki was sent flying backwards, visibly damaged by the attack, but then stopped as he was caught in a telekinetic grip by Odin. Excuse me for a moment, Azazel, Valley. I need to take care of my son here, before he can cause any more harm for anyone, he told them. Odin now summoned his magical powers, and suddenly a couple of metallic magical chains appeared and wrapped themselves around Loki's body. No, he yelled and tried to free himself. But he instantly realized that these chains had an incredible power behind them that was blocking his own energy. And in his weakened state he had no chance to break out. I see what you mean, Azazel stated. Both he and Valley had of course noticed that the younger god was about to unleash an attack on them all. It was not as if they truly trusted this Odin here just 5 minutes after meeting him, but he was obviously connected to Raynor, and in opposite to the other one he had not tried to attack them on sight. XXXXXXX, not so far away yet another fight was taking place. I see you are not so bad, Crossel commented, while he landed a hit on Devil Issei in his balance breaker armor, for an amateur. Tell me, how did you get so strong so quickly? That is not your fucking business, Issei yelled as he tried to land another hit on his opponent, but missed. Much raw power, but little control over it, Crossel remarked. Ah, I see. You have traded some parts of your body against those of a dragon. Let me see. One arm, an eye, a few internal organs. The dragon parts of Issei's body had now fully manifested themselves. One of his eyes was in fact replaced by the bright green one with a slit pupil of a dragon, that was glowing at his opponent angrily. An interesting method to get more powerful, for someone who is either unskilled or desperate. More the second one in your case, right? Crossel commented. You did all that just to beat me. And now look at yourself. I am wounded, weakened, and I can't use all my powers, and you are still not winning. He landed a hit on Issei with a large light spear he had formed that actually cut through Issei's armor and beneath that left a visible gash on his chest. Like the Guardians, Crossel knew how to channel his own spiritual energy, to negate magical powers. Like in this case the balance breaker armor. Of course this could be countered if the opponent knew the same technique, a similar defense, or if the difference in power was just too great. Sadly, neither of it was the case here. With his weapons and even his bare hands, he was able to cause damage to the dragon scale armor. Issei growled at him and continued fighting. He was backed up by Irina, who jumped to his defense and clashed against Crossel's light spears with her Excalibur. Crossel however also felt himself getting weaker. Even with his power keeping his blood running, his wound was more than getting to him, and he was getting tired. You know, even if you defeat me, it won't help you at all. No, my presence is the only thing that keeps the lords from attacking our worlds, he called out. Kill me and you will be faced with a threat worse than you can ever imagine. Asia was at the same moment directing her power at Issei to heal his wound. Do you really think I would buy that? Issei exclaimed. My counterpart was right. They are just playing you like a puppet. You are nothing but their lapdog. He landed another hard hit on his opponent, not far from the wound that had already destroyed his heart and should have killed him if it were not for his powers. Crossel staggered backwards. He looked at Issei, his face now twisted by hate. You dare, he called out. You know, he said. Blood was now flowing out of his mouth from his injuries. I think I would be able to use my sacred gear. At least for a short moment without dying. Say goodbye to your friend. His anger was now overcoming him. For a short moment he let it dictate his action instead of his self-preservation. His gaze turned to Irina, and then to Asia. Issei instantly realized what he was intending. No, he shouted. He would not lose another friend, or anyone close to that bastard, never again. This might be not the Asia he had known, but she was still Asia. But it was already too late. Asia felt it suddenly, how Crossel's powers concentrated on her just for a split second, and then the terrible pain, as her blood vessels exploded from the inside out and her entire body was being ripped apart. Blood was splattered over the entire place and hit all of them. In the same split second, however, in that Crossel had concentrated his powers on someone else, Issei had lost the last of his restraint on his anger and attacked him again. All his hatred, his grief and his power was concentrated in this single blow. His opponent, however, made a critical mistake. He thought his attack on Asia would distract Issei and Irina. Instead, it only caused them to attack him even more enraged. In fact, by concentrating the powers that were keeping him alive on someone else, he made himself vulnerable in this short moment, and that was all Issei needed. The sharp edges of the boosted gear cut deep into Crossel's flesh, and as the full energy of the magical augmented hit was unleashed, it crushed Crossel's ribcage, ripped up his inner organs and sent him crashing to the ground. For a moment, Devil Issei was standing above him in grim satisfaction. "Why, you don't know what you have done," Crossel told them weakly, while his shattered body was barely clinging to life. Even his sacred gear was not helping him anymore. Your worlds will burn. "We will see about that," Issei replied darkly. A moment later, Irina let her sword come down, cutting off their opponent's head. "Just to make sure," she stated grimly. Both of them were now looking down to Asia's body. "No, Asia," Issei whispered as he saw the scene of horror. "Not again, not again." They both froze in shock at what they were seeing. Her entire body was covered with large gaping wounds. One in particular ran across her entire upper body and her stomach. Some of her inner organs were visible. Blood was everywhere. It was the most horrifying thing they had ever seen. Yet still somehow she was somehow still alive, barely. They were both looking at the small nun, who was seeing up to them in a completely pained expression. While not truly targeting a vital organ, it could barely be surpassed in brutality. It had destroyed blood vessels, flesh and tissue all over her body. They were pretty sure this was even beyond the Twilight Helling's abilities to heal. Issei," she whispered quietly with a broken voice. She should be dead. Both of them knew that. The weak green radiation shining around her was the only reason she was even still clinging to life. But even that wouldn't last. All what it did now was prolonging her suffering. Asia. How could this monster have done this to her of all people? Issei wanted nothing more in this moment than bring the bastard back to life so that he could beat him to death all over again. He broke down to his knees, sobbing. Irina only looked at him in worry. She didn't know how her beloved friend would take going through this again. "No," he said. "Not again. Why? Why does this always have to happen? Why can't I protect one of my friends? Damn it," he called out. But then something happened that neither of them would have expected. The glow of the twilight healing suddenly changed. Instead, Asia's entire form was suddenly surrounded by wild green-colored flames. They watched as her body literally regenerated itself. Her wounds were closing and disappearing. Moments later, Asia stood up again, still surrounded by the greenish fire. "Issei, Irina," she said to them. "How?" Irina asked in shock. I am so glad that you are okay, Asia," Issei stammered. For a moment he even forgot that this was not the Asia he had known. "But how?" he questioned. "It seems that the gift Madeline and Jean had given to us actually works out," Asia stated happily. "I have to say this is impressive." They hear another voice, one that Asia knew, Issei and Irina however now. "It seems your new friends were actually able to upgrade the twilight healing. Who would have thought?" "Azazel-sama," Asia greeted him. "Azazel," Issei repeated. He felt his body going stiff. He clenched his fist. This was the leader of the fallen angels. He was standing there with Odin and a silver-haired young man. He remembered how Raynor, Raynor, had claimed that she killed Asia only for that man's sake. "Calm down, Issei," Odin told him. "Azazel and Valley here are on our side, at least for now." As he said this, he at the same time concentrated his mental powers on Issei. He felt that he was short about to break emotionally. And the Juggernaut drive was the last thing they needed right now. "Right indeed," the man named Valley said. "So you are the Security, my rival," he stated. Issei froze even more at his words. Could this guy be the Vari Lucifer? Here is indeed the White Dragon Emperor, Odin told them. "But this here is not the Issei from our world. He is like me, a version from another reality. But that is not important right now. We have to find Kokobiel. We have to stop him. Kokobiel has gone to Kuo," Asia informed them. He He plans to destroy the entire town and to kill both Rias and Sona. Yes, he wants a new war to break out, Irina confirmed. Odin and Azazel exchanged a quick look at this revelation. It seems we should better hurry up, Azazel said. XXXXXXXQO they all had just survived Kokobiel's first assault of the battle. Not all of them without injuries. Now they were trying to strike back. Rias and Akino were firing wave after wave of destruction power and lightning at him. Ravel had joined in with fire. Issei with dragon shot. Raynor, Donasek, Kalawarner and Gariel were sending blasts and light spears. Kokobiel's magical defenses actually weakened. But they were still holding. Then he decided to once again strike back on his own. This time he fired not spears but blasts of light at them. They all saw it coming. And most of them were able to avoid it once again, either by phasing once again or by simply getting out of the way. Xenovia however was glazed by one of the explosions as one blast hit the ground, and so was Kiba who was trying to help her move. Another of his blasts however missed them all and impacted right into a corner of the city. The explosion leveled a dozen buildings and set the entire surrounding area on fire. There was no telling how many people had just been killed. Issei was once again attempting to use the sword of Cronus. But it was all but easy, as he quickly found out when he swung the blade toward the sky. Like before, it formed flying slashes who just appeared somewhere in the air, moving directly through time and space. The first one missed Kokobiel by 15 meters. The next one still missed its target. It was only then, when he closed his eyes and was trying once again to concentrate on his opponent. And as he swung his weapon this time, a visible bleeding cut suddenly appeared at Kokobiel's shoulder. Ah! The Grigori leader called out in surprise, before his gaze turned to Issei. The weapon. Yes, it seems you are slowly getting a better grip on it. XXX Kalawarner was watching what was happening around her and she admitted, a part of her just wanted to run away. Taking revenge on Kokobiel, that was easy to say. Now, when he was actually before them, things were looking quite different. She had simply not realized just how powerful Kokobiel truly was. Even with their improved power, he was taking on all of them at the same time, and she could tell that he was not even serious. Kalawarner remembered what happened less than a half hour ago in the castle. XXXXXXX earlier inside the castle they had just been freeing the captured devil, who turned out to be Ravel Phoenix, as suddenly Mittelt of all people had come running around the corner and was now standing right in front of them. Kalawarner, Donasek, Raynor, the young girl stammered as she recognized who was in front of her. Look who we have here, Donasek said. He and Kalawarner formed light spears in their hands. No, I am sorry, she called out. I was only afraid that they would kill me. Please, Mittelt called out. It was you she was trying to kill Kalawarner, Raynor stated. Now, as I remember, you had threatened to cut off my breasts, right? Kalawarner turned to Mittelt. I don't know what came over me. I was just trying to. Look, I wanted Sartale to believe I was on his side. I am here because I wanted to get away from these freaks. I thought if I managed to free the devil who is held here. But then I saw that you are already here, she pleaded. Kalawarner took a look at her former teammate. Get out of my sight, she finally said a few moments later. Be glad. It seems the last few weeks have made me soft. XXXXXXX looking back, she was more than happy that she made this decision. If Kokobiel would offer her the same thing now as Sartale did Mittelt, she wasn't even sure how she would react. Yes, Kokobiel meanwhile rejoiced, what a wonderful fight. It is nearly like in old times, he said to himself, well, nearly, he said coldly. And then he suddenly released his full power, radiating a wave of energy that alone nearly knocked most of them out of the sky and caused the ones standing on the ground to lose their balance. A few of them only now realized just how outmatched they were. Why are you even fighting so hard? Kokobiel asked them casually. Why are you trying so much? Even if you all know how this will be ending. Can it be that you simply don't know the truth? What truth? That you are a maniac who cares about nothing but starting a war that could destroy us all. Rias shouted. We already know that. I am talking about the truth that had the whole time been intentionally hidden from you by the leaders of all three factions, Kokobiel responded. This truth is the great secret that the Church, the Gregori and even the devils are hiding. At the end of the Great War, not only the three devil kings had perished in battle like it was stated, but also God himself, he announced. Yes, that is the truth, he called out, God is dead. To his surprise, however, most of them didn't seem that surprised about this revelation. While the members of the C-Tree peerage were shocked, the others in fact didn't seem to react at all. We already knew, Zenobia said to him. We have been told during our journey to another universe. So you do know, Kokobiel stated. Then you also know the ultimate truth. This world, this universe is senseless and broken. It was alone God's presence that gave this world reason and order. Without him, everything is just turning to shit. You are wrong, Issei told him. As you know, we have seen other universes. What had died was only a part of God. He is still alive in all those worlds. He still exists. Kokobiel looked at him for a moment. But then he only laughed. That is good for those worlds, he stated cynically. But sadly it won't help ours at all. Ours is lost beyond hope. No, you are wrong, Issei called out. Just take a look around you, Kokobiel told him. The angels and the church were supposed to be the messengers of God. Now they are only a bunch of false prophets who are selling everyone a lie and pretend God is still alive. The devils were supposed to be incarnations of darkness. Now they are only a group of slaveholders and corrupt hypocrites. We, the Gregori, are supposed to be an organization based on freedom and independence for the fallen angels. Instead, we are now manipulating and using, even enslaving others just to ensure our own survival. Humanity was once God's most precious creation. Now they are nothing but sheep, waiting to be used and abused by anyone who crosses their way. The church is corrupt, the devils are more corrupt, the Gregori are corrupt. Hell, even I am corrupt. For 1,000 years I have played this sick game, pretending everything was alright. But not anymore. Never again, he proclaimed. As you might know, I was once known as the Angel of the Stars. I was the first who had taught the ancestors of humanity about the cosmos. Yes, me, Azazel and the others, we were once their teachers. I even fell for their sakes. But that was before. Before God died, before everything had turned into a giant joke. On the battlefield, however, things are different, he said to himself. Yes, when we were fighting, when we are at war and we are facing our enemies, things still make sense. He started to laugh. His reddish eyes seemed to glow in an even more sinister shade than before. And I will have that again. And if we are all getting destroyed, it is still better than this wretched life. Practically everyone around was thinking exactly the same thing. He was completely insane. For the three Gregori members, it was a sobering experience that this hollow shell had been one of their leaders. That is the reason you are doing all this? Kiba asked him angrily. That is why you allowed Valper Galilei to continue his experiments and ruin even more lives. That is why you want to destroy this town and kill my master. Only because you think this life is senseless you try to destroy everyone else. You have manipulated Raynor to kill Asia, and me. And then you have set her and her teammates up to die, Issei stated. And now you are trying to destroy my hometown. Who the hell do you think gives you that right? Enough. Donasek now growled angrily. He once again used the phasing technique. He formed a light spear and charged directly at their enemy. This time, however, he used it to move directly through Kokobiel's defense and only became fully corporal again as he was directly in front of him, and his spear had already buried itself into his opponent's shoulder. Yes, a few of them thought in this moment as they saw the successful attack. But then their expression suddenly changed, as Kokobiel stabbed Donasek in return, and that while he was still phasing. Kokobiel had figured out to use key manipulation, they all realized. Either that or he was able to do it from the beginning. Ah, you have a few nice tricks, indeed, the fallen angel leader commented. You all are using key and combine it with your attacks, right? And that allows you to counter any sort of supernatural defense, even this one. He was looking in Donasek's eyes. Kokobiel's light spear had pierced right through his chest. Very clever. But have you really thought a leader of the Gregori would not be able to use his own spiritual energy? For a bunch of children, you are truly quite arrogant. He lifted his arm and fired another beam of light, that now completely vaporized the body of the other fallen angel. No, Calawarner whispered as she watched Donasek's death. Her anger of her former superior grew even more now, but so did her sheer terror. You were right, however, Kokobiel stated. It is time to end this. He moved now, faster than most of them could even follow. And he reappeared right next to Akeno and Rias. Before any of them even fully understood what had happened, he had created yet another light spear and cut Akeno down. He had cut her arm clean off as the others now realized, and Rias Queen was lying wounded and crippled to his feet. And nobody was standing anymore between him and his true target. Now we are finally back, alone, he addressed her. With one move he cut with his spear over her chest, leaving a deep wound, and Rias fell down right next to her best friend. Kiba, Kaneko and Zenobia were attempting to charge at him, but a light beam, aimed at the ground before them, forced them to stay on distance. Now, where is your friend Citri? He asked Rias. I don't see her anywhere around. In fact, I have not seen her for some time now, since I was distracted. Has she run away like a coward? Or is there another reason for her absence? He stabbed the light spear into her shoulder, what caused her to cry out in agony. While none of her wounds was deadly, the light that was now running through her veins was destroying her body from the inside out, and it was incredibly painful. She had left to inform the underworld. You better give up now. Every minute my brother and Sartale can arrive here. And they will destroy you when they see this. Oh yes. Still, a spoiled brat till the end, I see, Kokobiel remarked. But do you know something? I don't need a minute. With these words he stabbed her through the heart. Rias' eyes looked at him in shock before her body sank down motionless. No, Kiba and Kaneko called out. Issei just came fully back to his senses and fully comprehended what had happened. He didn't know Danasik that well. To him he was mostly one of Raynor's teammates. And despite that, he admitted he still felt some resentment for Rias for letting Raynor kill him. Just like he did for Raynor herself, despite loving her, he had started to consider her a friend and would never want to see her die. Kokobiel meanwhile continued with the others who were challenging him. Kiba, Kaneko, Zenobia, he cut them all down without mercy, leaving them bloody and wounded. But he didn't even bother to go for the kill. He had what he wanted. The death of even one sibling of a Mao by his hand was a point of no return. Just to make sure, however, he would still level the rest of this town. Hopefully he could cause as much damage as possible, before the Mao actually arrived. He turned around to the Security, the rest of the Citri peerage and the other two female sword fighters facing him. Behind him, Raynor and Calawarner and Ravel were now moving to help the ones he had just defeated. Raynor looked down to Rias. She sensed that there was still a small spark of life in the devil, that was however vanishing right now. It seemed it was time to try out her new powers. She activated her sacred gear. It is kind of ironic, she whispered as she looked at Rias. By what we have heard, you have killed me in a few other realities, and here I am standing, saving you. The light green shine of the twilight healing was suddenly replaced by green flames that were surrounding her entire body. What the? Kiba asked as he was looking up to her. This is the gift from our teachers that Odin had mentioned, Raynor stated. Jean and Madeline had combined our sacred gear, each with a small spark of phoenix fire. Phoenix? Ravel asked, surprised. Not the kind that you and your family are using, she replied. No, it came directly from the cosmic force that these creatures and you have originally gotten it from. A pure phoenix flame, directly from the source. I fear you and your clan are old news now, my dear, she grinned. Ravel frowned a bit but said nothing. The original twilight healing is very valuable. But it still has some weaknesses, Raynor explained. It couldn't replace limbs, she stated, as Akeno's cut-off arm was suddenly replaced by another that grew out of her body. Around them, the injuries of the others were healing as well. It couldn't overcome death, she said, as Rias' body was repairing itself and her heart started to beat again. And it couldn't replace lost strength and stamina, Raynor claimed as she widened the range of her power even more. And suddenly all of them felt the strength they had lost during the battle returning to them. They all, even or more likely especially Kokobiel, were staring disbelieving at what just happened. Rias looked up stunned as she fully realized who had just saved her. To make that clear, devil, this doesn't mean we are friends or something, understood? Raynor said to her. No, Kokobiel finally called out. How do you dare to heal this devil? Raynor, you are ruining everything, he shouted. And with pleasure, she replied. In his anger he raised his arms, preparing another light beam that he aimed at her. No, you won't, Issei hissed and raised his sword of Cronus at him. At the same time, he used transfer to send some of his power to Raynor, while she in return used her Phoenix Twilight Healing to replace his lost strength. Ah, do I sense some attachment here? Kokobiel turned around to him. His expression was now downright murderous. Oh yes, I have heard about it. You love her, right? Despite that she had originally ended your life. Quite ironic, isn't it? But as you wish, I will spare her for the last. After I kill every single other one of your friends. He fired. But to everyone's surprise he didn't aim at Raynor. Instead, a small light beam hit Murayama and left a gaping hole in her chest. Issei felt how something cracked deep inside him as he saw his classmate and friend, who he did everything to save just 2 weeks ago, thought about everything Kokobiel had done, and he just could not longer take it. As he lost for a moment all control of his anger, he heard Diedrag's voice hailing through his mind. I who is about to awaken, am the heavenly dragon who has taken the principles of domination from God. What is going on? Issei asked himself. Is this? On the outside, he at first only let out a loud painful, nearly inhuman, scream, nearly a howl. But then the change became truly visible. I laugh at the infinite, and I grieve at the dream. He was barely able to hear the rest of the chant that was now the center of his world. And I shall sink you to the depths of the crimson purgatory. Kill. Destroy him. Hate. Power. Issei heard voices inside his mind. Use the power. Destroy. Destroy the one you hate. At some level he was aware that this were the voices of the soul fragments from the past wielders that were stored inside his sacred gear that were screaming at him. But for him this knowledge made no real difference right now. Not when he was slowly losing himself. At the outside world Issei's power suddenly literally exploded around him while he was still screaming. A few of them noticed him murmuring the strange words a moment later, the chant to activate the Juggernaut drive. The earth was trembling and shaking under his feet. Unknown to them all for now, it was a quake that involved the greatest part of Japan, with Issei standing directly at the EPI center. All his friends were looking at him worried. Even Kokobiel had halted as he sensed the unbelievable power suddenly radiating from him. Had he not been inside his balance breaker armor, they would have seen Issei's eyes glowing in a bright deep green. But then they all saw it, as his armor began to change, mutate, becoming far more primal and savage looking, like a real dragon. They all suspected and feared what this meant. Issei. No, Irina called out. Raynor was standing close to Murayama, healing her. But that changed nothing. It was far too late. They both as well were watching horrified what happened to Issei. Boost 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 boost. Issei heard inside his mind. It was too much to control, too much to even think. Subconsciously, he was at the same time changing, modifying, his human body, to channel even more power through him. Issei had found out some time ago, during his short clash with Kiba Yuto, that he was under certain situations able to mentally manipulate aspects of his own sacred gear. For example then when he had been able to access part of the power of his balance breaker, in this case the ability to boost multiple times at once, without actually using it. Now however it was not just his sacred gear that he was changing and reshaping with his thoughts, but his own human body. But it were thoughts that were going rampant and he was not longer able to fully control. Boost 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 boost. Even Kokobiel was now staring in horror at what he had unleashed, and was unconsciously moving backwards. He had wanted a new war, what he got was something different. He watched how Issei's power was quickly matching and then surpassing his own. And it was still growing. Finally, he lifted off into the air. He was preparing another attack. But this time one that would wipe out the entire town as well, and hopefully this monster as well. He was collecting energy, enough to destroy everything in a 20-mile radius. But before he had the chance to fire, the now fully transformed Issei had already unleashed his own attack, a mutated form of dragon shot, at him. The blast would have been enough to wipe out hundreds of angels or devils in one moment. Kokobiel's form was completely vaporized. They had won the battle. But if nothing happened, they were in danger to lose everything. With his last truly conscious thought, Issei flew off, getting as far away from the town as possible. XXX as a small group arrived a short time later, closely followed by another one. What they found was not exactly what they had expected. Where is Kokobiel? Azazel and Odin had asked them. The question was a short time repeated by Sirzex and Grafia, who arrived a minute later. The answer they got was in both cases the same. He is dead. Issei killed him, Raynor explained. But he went into Juggernaut Drive, Rias said. They all felt the incredible power only a few miles away from the town. It had already surpassed all of them, even Azazel and Sirzex, and it was still growing. They knew they needed to stop him. In this state, Issei was not only a threat to Kuo, but the entire world. So they made the only possible decision and followed him. XXX Issei was standing inside a valley not far from the town. His mind, however, was far away. Part of Issei felt as if he was everywhere at once. Unconsciously he released another wave of energy around him, burning everything in a 2-mile radius to ash. The small part of him that was actually aware what he was doing, but could only watch helplessly, was more glad whenever that he left Kuo as he still could. He felt the power flowing through him. It was enough to wipe out continents in the blink of an eye. He could cause tornadoes, tsunamis and earthquakes, just by thinking about it. This Juggernaut Drive, however, was different from the ones of every past wielder, since the powers he had inherited from Darien were also part of it and not boosted in a similar way as the boosted gears. He could sense, no, literally see, the circling molecules of the objects around him, and he could manipulate them however he wanted. If he wanted, he could turn mountain areas into seas, cities into deserts, sink entire countries into the ocean. He sensed the others close by. They were coming for him, he knew. He could feel them as if they were standing right next to him. Raynor, lonely, cynical and bitter about her life, yet strong-willed, loyal in her own way and yearning to be loved and cherished, but hiding all her feelings and insecurities behind a facade of arrogance and pride. Willing to kill for her goals, and plagued by terrible guilt over what she had done to him. Coming to deeply love him despite everything. But still being deeply devoted to her leader Azazel, nearly to the point of obsession until a short time ago. His childhood friend Irina, who had fallen in love with him pretty early. Always devoted to him, having a naughty side on her that she has normally buried deep inside. Until he had seen some of it recently. A deep faith in God and a nearly complete loyalty to the church, even knowing his version in this universe is dead. Like the others, coming to save him. Asia, the innocent and gentle soul. Always seeing the best in everything and everyone, but since a short time she was letting her bitter experiences getting to her and making her a bit less optimistic. Rias, proud and arrogant devil, but with a soft side for her family and her peerage. Liar, manipulator and even murderer if it would serve her purpose, yet trying and wanting to be a good person. He could know all of them better than himself, if he wanted, see every memory of them since their birth. Or he could rip their minds to shreds and drive them all insane with a single thought. And the others? Only Odin, Azazel and Sirzex were the only ones whose mental defenses he could not instantly overcome, not yet. But even them, in this stage, he would be able to crack and look inside their minds. Or he could have if his own mind had consisted of anything else than the voices of 100 past wilders, screaming at him and dragging him into dozens of different directions. You are the strongest, he heard one voice saying, the strongest in this world. Rule it. Use this power. The small part of him that was still aware watched as his body unleashed another blast, one even more powerful than the one who destroyed Kokobiel. Azazel and Valley were barely able to evade the attack that could have killed even them easily. Issei felt the power flowing through him, enough to break the planet in half. He could even sense the time itself flowing and the world moving around him, like a band that he could grab and bend, or rip apart. Like the world was in his hand. But he lacked any control. It was not him using the power, it was the power, and the countless angry soul fragments inside, that were controlling him. At the outside world they all heard the roaring of the monster their friend had become and they saw the attack he had just sent out in fright. Issei, please stop this, Irina called out to him. We love you. She corrected herself as she saw Raynor giving her a short side glance. Yes Issei, we love you, Raynor shouted as well. I am sorry for what I have done in the past. You know that. Yes, Issei. Asia, who had arrived with Odin, Azazel and Valley, called out to him, please come back to us. Issei. I know I have called you a useless pervert more than once. But then you have saved me and, please don't get yourself killed now, Murayama called out. The others were doing the same, Rias, Akano, Zenobia, Kiba. He, a small part of them, heard them all, and was trying with all his strength to regain control. My friends, he felt himself thinking, they are here. They are trying to help me, but. Diedrag, how should he? What should he do? XXX partner. He heard one voice out of the many. Diedrag, he thought. Yes, partner. What we are experiencing now is the Juggernaut drive. A curse placed upon me and Albion when we were sealed in the sacred gears, you could say. In this state, the hate, anger, bitterness, and hunger for power, acquainted from hundreds of past hosts, and from myself, has taken control. I have gone through this before. But I admit this time it seems even worse than the lasts. The power you have received from the Guardians is still mixing with my own, and the result is even more terrible and uncontrollable. We can and we very likely will destroy this world if we stay like this for longer. Can we stop it? Issei asked him. Yes. Diedrag answered. But there is only one way. We have to convince the past hosts, or to destroy them. I understand, Issei replied. Partner, to do that, we have to work together. You have to bound your power and your thoughts to mine. For a short moment, Issei saw himself floating in an empty space, right in front of the giant red form of Diedrag. Then he felt himself reaching out to him. And suddenly, for a few seconds more, Issei and Diedrag were one, two halves of a whole. As a side effect, however, his power on the outside grew even more, to everyone presents shock. For Azazel it nearly felt like back then than he had faced Diedrag in his original form all those years ago. Normally the energy would have been far more than Issei's human body could have channeled, and it would have destroyed him, if he had not modified it before. Silence. A loud voice, coming from them both, was howling through Issei's mind. You. No, we have to stop this, he called to the fragments of the past wielders. This is wrong. Dangerous, Issei shouted again. We will destroy everything. But the soul fragments were not listening and continued their rampage, preparing another attack directed at his friends. Then Diedrag did something else. He used all the strength he could still muster and sent a mental picture into his own mind to all of them. It showed them what exactly they had become. A rampaging monster that could only kill and destroy and would devastate the world, until either they would kill themselves or they would be left alone on nothing but a burning mountain of ruins. Is it that what you want to be? Issei asked them all. Most of the soul fragments hesitated now, after he had hammered the picture into their collective mind. Only a few of them still continued, the most fanatical and insane under them. At the same time, however, some of the shackles on Issei's own self was released and he managed to regain some control of his powers again. And he also felt help he was receiving from the outside. Odin, Raynor, Gariel, Azazel and Sirzex, they all were using their own telepathic powers to assist him, to help him regain control. In the next moment Issei sent a powerful wave of telepathy and magical energy through his own mind. As a result, the remaining soul fragments who still tried to continue the destruction were burned away and destroyed. The ones, however, who had been willing to change and stop were spared. Then suddenly, it was over. The giant power that had built itself up dissipated and disappeared, and all what was left was Issei's human self. He sank down to his knees, completely exhausted and drained. He saw the others laying right next to him. Raynor and Irina were both taking him into their arms, with Asia only close behind. Then he drifted off into sleep. XXXXXXX Asgard, DXD Universe, a short time later. To say the North gods of this world were surprised would be a complete understatement. They were shocked. Most of them had been sitting together on a large table for the evening, as suddenly out of nowhere, a double of Odin appeared, and over his shoulder he was carrying nobody else than a bound Loki. What the? Someone called out. The reaction of everyone was more or less like you would have expected. Many stood there like frozen in place, others had taken their weapons out. Thor was moving in front of Odin and his prisoner. Who are you? He asked. a bit aggressively but controlled, and why are you holding my brother captive? He also saw the great resemblance the stranger had to his father. Ah Thor, I am happy to see you, even if you are not really the same, Odin replied. I am, as you could call it, a traveler between dimensions. And about my identity, I think you can guess, he said while he was showing them his version of the spear gunner that he was holding in front of his body. The Aesir all saw and of course recognized it. Very interesting, the other Odin replied, if you are who you claim to be. Stand down. For now, he addressed the gods and Valkyries who had their weapon drawn. I admit I never expected to meet myself, he grinned. The magic power of your spear is clearly real. Even if it is somehow different from my own. That means he is either who he claims to be or a very good imitation, Thor stated. In either case it would be better to keep a close eye on me, right? Odin suggested. Two of the Valkyries, who were standing right next to Odin's throne, were exchanging a quick look. One of them, a silver-haired woman named Rosweiss, was especially stunned to see this double of their master. But that doesn't explain why you bring Loki back here in chains, Thor replied. Your son here had made a deal with a very dangerous being named Crossel, who is luckily dead now, about a weapon that could help him bring the end of the world, Odin explained to his counterpart. How he will surely tell you about when you interrogate him. Loki said nothing, just looking at the ground, clenching his teeth. Odin seemed to look at them thoughtfully. Too bad, he said, I didn't thought that Loki would do something like that. At least not so suddenly. I have known that Loki would try to start Ragnarok sooner or later. But I had never thought that he would try it in this way, and teaming up with an outsider, he shrugged. By the way, may I ask what exactly you have been doing while all of that happened? Odin asked his counterpart. If you kept a closer watch on him from the beginning, this wouldn't have been necessary. I mean, you knew that he would try to start Ragnarok at one point, right? If I were you, I would ask my Valkyries to keep an eye on him the entire time. Oh well, you see, I had important business to attend to, Odin replied. But that with the Valkyries is a great idea, really. I don't know why I didn't thought of that. What important business was that? Odin inquired from his counterpart. Father was just visiting strip clubs and chasing after women, with the Valkyrie Rosweiss watching over him as usual, Thor stated, rolling his eyes. Odin felt how his face fell. What? Thor? Odin hissed slightly, there is no reason to mention this now. I only thought if we allow our new guest to stay a bit longer, to make sure he is truly who he claims to be, he should know what he is getting himself into, the Thunder God smirked. XXXXXXX the underworld, 2 days later it was over. The battle against Kokobiel, against Crossel. They had won. Issei had woken up a good day after the fight was over. Juggernaut drive, they all knew had taken up a lot of his life energy, but still he was recovering incredible quickly. Given Azazel's calculations, he should have lost maybe 10 to 12% of his lifespan. Since he had only been a short time in Juggernaut drive and actually managed to overcome it. But as it turned out a bit later, however, his lost life energy seemed in fact to be regenerating itself. Azazel mentioned that he had a theory about this, but he still needed to check a few things. Issei didn't need to wait for his results. He had a good idea what had happened as a side effect of overcoming the Juggernaut drive. He sensed the change in himself. The transformation that had begun during his resurrection was now completed, by his own hand. With other words, he had become immortal. The bodies of Crossel and Sartale had been recovered and buried by now. From Kokobiel and Donasek, however, or the many guards who had died in the castle in Bulgaria, there had been no remains left to discover. 120 humans had died during Kokobiel's attack by the last account. The devils explained the destruction to the public as a terrorist attack. What was ironically also the truth, except for the detail of the terrorist not being human. The spirit of the people in Kuo, humans and devils alike, was hit hard by the sudden attack, but they also were recovering. Otherwise, the life in his hometown continued as always. It was the cruelest, most brutal and terrible fight they had ever taken part of. But all in all, they got lucky. Donasek was the only member of their team they had truly lost, the only one the improved Twilight healing couldn't save in the end, and even the number of killed civilians could have been much higher, given Kokobiel's power. Issei's and Irina's doubles had returned to their own world one day later. But not without agreeing to stay in contact for a while. For Issei, there was only one thing left to do. XXX. In this moment he was standing here, in the middle of a fighting arena in some sort of professorical pocket dimension, that was designed to look exactly like Kuo Academy. To be more precise, it had been the fighting place for the rating game between Rias Peerage and Razor Phoenix. Like it was agreed the game had taken place, and like anyone could have predicted, Rias had lost. While she and her peerage had grown incredible during the last weeks, physically and mentally, and nobody could deny that they had been putting up a great fight, they were still being outnumbered 16 against 4, and their opponents had been experienced in the games and quite powerful. They never had a true chance. Still, the Grimoire peerage had actually managed to take out half of Razors before they had been defeated. Now the next part of the schedule for today had arrived, and how many people in the underworld though, the real show. It was the announced duel between the third son of the House of Phoenix and Issei Hyodo, the Security and the man who had slain Kokobiel. It was something that spread through the underworld like a wildfire. Issei and Razor were standing about 10 meters in front of each other, on what was an exact replica of Kuo Academy's schoolyard. While the Phoenix had his typical arrogant posture, however, he was now looking at Issei with a measure of respect he didn't possess before. I admit I owe you my thanks for saving my sister Security, Razor addressed him. But you still won't win today. You won't defeat Razor Phoenix. I am sorry to disappoint you, Razor, Issei replied casually, but I have faced far worse beings than you. You might have killed Kokobiel. But we both know that you had help and had only gotten lucky. Really? Then Razor, let us have a good fight. Wouldn't you agree? Issei stated. This is something we can agree on, Razor grinned. But if you are so sure of yourself, Issei responded, how about a little bet? He smiled at him. Let me make the first strike. If that is your wish. Only to show you how chanceless you are, Razor replied. Can I use a weapon? Issei asked and materialized his training sword in his hand. You can. It will make no difference, he stated, completely confident in his regeneration ability. Don't worry. I will not cause any dangerous wounds. Believe me, Security, you won't be able to, Razor responded, just standing there as Issei readied his sword. Overconfidence is your downfall, Phoenix, he thought to himself. Issei moved incredible fast. Like he had said, he was only causing a light cut as he sliced the blade over Razor's face. But it was already more than enough. Razor instantly moved his hand to his cheek as he felt the bleeding cut. It was at first only light surprise. But then it turned into complete shock as he realized one thing. The wound was not disappearing like it was supposed to. What? No, that is impossible, he called out. Razor was staring at his opponent open-mouthed and completely unbelieving. The reaction from the crowd who was watching the fight was quite similar, stunned silence. This boy, Issei Hyodo, had a way to negate the Phoenix regeneration. Now Razor, do you still think that I can do nothing to you? He remarked. He once again moved, taking the still shocked Razor completely off guard, and punched him right in the face. As Rias had once mentioned to him, the best way to defeat a Phoenix was to completely destroy his self-confidence, since his regeneration ability was influenced by his mindset. Not that he even needed to do this. Razor was looking up to him, still completely out of it. Don't you think it would be better to give up? Issei stated. You are clearly not in a good state. Something in Razor's expression changed. No, he called out, I won't lose. I won't, he screamed and threw a wave of fire at Issei, who however easily dodged it. As you wish, he said quietly. Issei activated a partial balance breaker, using his ability to manipulate his own sacred gear with his mind. A dragon-scale armor formed around his right hand. Boost, boost, boost. He felt his power multiplying, and then hit Razor once again and knocked him out. Razor was now lying motionless in the makeshift arena. What followed was once again silence from the spectators, that was then suddenly followed by cheers and still unbelieving applause. He had just defeated a Phoenix, with 2 hits. The story of the boy who had slain Kokobiel would now quickly turn into a legend in the underworld. XXXXXXX far away in another dimension, Universe 00309, somewhere in space. The 2 members of the Guardians, together with 3 others, were standing in front of the scene they had come here to investigate. The other 3 were members of the Green Lantern Corps, a group of intergalactic peacekeepers who existed in this world like in some other similar ones, the most well known for the Guardians, Universe 003, that this one here was a close variation from. Only that the history had developed somewhat different in some details. 2 of the 3 Green Lanterns were aliens from different races, the third was human. They were on a remote place, on a remote planet, in a remote part of space somewhere in a small satellite galaxy of the Milky Way. With other words, at the outer edge of habituated space. Here they were standing, next to their temporally allies, at part of the outskirts of one of the larger settlements. It was the scene of a massacre. In front of them were lying the remains of more than 20 natives of the planet. All of them reduced to nothing but piles of ashes and bones. Are we sure it is him? The Guardian called Dr. Strange asked Darien, who was standing right next to him. While he had been the supreme sorcerer on their Earth, a long time ago and had since then gathered centuries of experience and more power than he could ever have imagined, he had never faced this particular opponent directly before. But Darien did. The leftovers of the energy signatures, the psychic traces. You have sensed it yourself, the Guardian leader stated. It is nearly the same as I remember. But only nearly, Dr. Strange replied. If it is truly him, then he had lost most of his power, his physical vessel, and had been in this state for decades. Of course there would be differences. And if it is not him, then a creature very similar in nature and also a possible threat for this universe, Darien responded. So you believe it is this being you have been talking about? The human Green Lantern questioned. We have been tracing and following this creature over 4 sectors by now, one of the 2 alien lanterns pointed out. On over a dozen worlds we found signs of its presence. Wherever it goes, it kills sentient beings seemingly at random. This is already the 3rd massacre like this we have found. I see, Darien replied. If it is the one we are thinking or not, we will help you to stop this being. If we are right, then one of our greatest enemies has returned and we have to prevent him from regaining his old power. Or entire worlds could end up like this. Kuo Town. Several things had happened in the time since the battle against Kokobiel and the duel with Razor afterwards had ended. XXX Issei remembered how he had woken up after the fight, and his change into the Juggernaut drive, and how everyone had greeted him. He was glad that they all were okay, everyone except Donesik. His body had been completely destroyed, even beyond the augmented Twilight Helling's abilities. It was also the moment when he met some of the others for the first time. Well, at least when he was not controlled by the Juggernaut drive. To his surprise he got along with the leader of the fallen angels quite well. Azazel, outside of being leader of the Grigori, seemed to be an easygoing guy with a sense of humor and a similar appreciation for women as he himself had. Of course there was the detail that his first girlfriend, and, by now deeply regretful, killer, had obvious feelings for him. But as he already admitted, with him having her, Irina and Asia with him, plus planning to build up a harem, it wasn't as if he had much to talk about here. In the end they quickly agreed that, should Azazel ever decide to return her feelings, he would be willing to share her with him. After Raynor had agreed to his dream of a harem, he could hardly say something else, right? Of course there was no real guarantee that this would even be happening. There was however another one of the new faces who unsettled Issei far more. He remembered all too well the look that Valley Lucifer had sent in his direction as the 2 met. The White Dragon Emperor. He had heard the long story between the hosts of Didrag and Albion. The greatest part of it from Didrag himself. I am looking forward to fighting you in the future, Issei Hyodo, Valley had said to him. All his senses told him that the Hakuryuko was even stronger than Kokobiel had been. Great, as it looked he would have another incredible strong enemy in the future. At least this one would probably not intentionally target his friends in his hometown. At least Issei hoped so. XXXXXXX. The underworld. A certain devil, sitting in his personal castle, was just thinking about the events of the last day. Like so many others he had been present during the fight in the arena and had watched Issei Hyodo in person. No matter how much he hated the idea of her being close to him, even Diadora Astaroth knew it would be foolish to confront a being that powerful without a very good plan. To that came that he had just lost his closest ally in his latest plot. Master, a guest is wanting to see you. It is the person you were waiting for. One of his servants, a very attractive young woman, informed him, while he was sitting on his personal throne. Good. Let him in, Diadora told her smiling. Ah Shalba, it is good to see you, he said to the other devil who entered the room a few minutes later. These two had, in a twisted way, many things in common. All surrounding one thing, the name and title of Beelzebub, one of the four Mao. XXX Shalba Beelzebub was the son of the original Mao Beelzebub, while Diadora was the brother of the current holder of the title, Ajuka, after the original's death. And Shalba was a member of the so-called Old Mao factions of the Devils. Back after the end of the Great War, at the time when the civil war under the Devils had broken out, this was the faction who still followed the ideals of their old rulers. They wanted to continue the war and to put the direct descendants of the former Devil Kings in their place. The group following Searzex and the other new Mao however had wanted an end of the hostilities and the chance to rebuild their civilization. In the end it was the new Mao faction that won out, and Searzex, Serafal, Ajuka and Falbion became the new rulers of the underworld. The old Mao faction however still existed. Today however it had become one of the many subgroups of Chaos Brigade. What few people were aware of however, was that the overthrown children of the old Devil Kings were still holding important positions in the organization, and of course they were craving for revenge on the people who had taken the titles which they thought belonged rightfully to them. On these people and their families. XXX. Diadora, the newcomer returned the greeting. I have news for you from our contacts. Ah. Good. I had hoped to hear from you soon. Like you probably heard, the good Kokobiel is dead and his plans have failed. A shame really. If that maniac had actually managed to start a new war, we all could have realized our goals far easier. He shrugged. Yes, it is a shame, Shalba replied. While they were speaking he had passed the room and was now standing right in front of Diadora. Now I have to plan again from the beginning. I know it won't be easy and it could be dangerous. But I just cannot leave my precious Asia in the hands of that filthy dragon named Hyodo. I am sure you understand, my friend. He smiled. It was one of these smiles that were friendly on the outside, but gave you the creeps if you knew what was truly behind it. Of course, Shalba replied, returning his smile. If there is one thing that can be said about you then that you are truly devoted to the women you set your eyes on, he remarked. I see. You and me understand each other. Now tell me, what kind of help will the organization offer me? I am of course willing to offer my resources and connections in return. Before Diadora could say anything else however, Shalba had already stabbed him. What? He asked in shock. As I had told your servant, I have a message from our associates. Now that your idiotic scheme with Kokobiel has been blown, you have become a security risk. I have been told to eliminate you. He used his weapon to cut even deeper through Diadora's body, causing his victim even greater pain. You know, I would really like to tell you that I don't enjoy about this. But that would be a lie, Shalba stated coldly. To think that you actually believed that I was actually okay with working with a member of a clan of usurpers and pretenders. That I would willingly associate with scum like you. He grinned. But behind all your posturing you were never very bright, weren't you? About your little playthings and your other servants. Don't worry about them. They will all be joining you. We don't want any loose ends left after all. He looked down at the dying devil before him. And all that just because of a girl. Not power or glory or even status. No, just for another nun that you like to fuck. Really, how low can you get? This was all he said before the last life left Diadora and he just let his corpse lying on the ground without a care. As Shalba walked outside, he was greeted by the sight of dozens of dead bodies, and the small army of robed and masked assassins from Chaos Brigade who had accompanied him here. Diadora's entire peerage, all of them former nuns and holy maidens who had been excommunicated because of his various tricks and then corrupted by him, and the guards that had protected this place, his men had taken care of them quite quickly. The servant who had announced his arrival to Diadora a minute earlier lied right in front of the entrance. Is that all of them? He asked one of the assassins. Yes, sir. He replied. Good, he answered. Then let us leave. I don't want to spend more time at this place than necessary, he said, looking around. XXXXXXX. On the next day after the fight against Razor, Issei had come back home and had now officially introduced his girlfriend Yuma to his parents. With other words, she had restored their memories of the fact that she existed, and the chance to meet them in person. And he had also brought Irina with them and introduced her as his second girlfriend. To say that they were stunned would be an understatement. With the way their son usually acted, they would have hardly expected him to bring a girlfriend with home anywhere in the close future, even less too. He had not informed them about his connection with the supernatural, not yet. Maybe he could bring himself to do that at some point in the future. Of course, they both remembered Irina from a few years back and were happy to see her. Okay, that she and Issei would get together would not even have surprised them that much, but not with another girl involved. That technically Asia was involved in their relationship as well, had they not even mentioned yet. And you are okay with this? Issei's mother asked Yuma, a bit surprised. Yes, I am, she answered. To be honest, me and Issei, we had problems recently and it was all only my fault. I had treated him horrible. But he has forgiven me and even taken me back. You should not agree with something like that just because you are feeling guilty, Issei's mother said sternly. You seem like a nice girl, and whatever you have done, I am sure you are sorry about it. My son should truly not take advantage of you like this. Lady, you have not the slightest idea what you are talking about, Raynor thought. If you knew all what really happened, you would be the first to tell him to dump me for Irina or Asia. What riled her up the most was that this human woman, his own mother, rather blamed Issei than her for their problem. Ever if she had already clearly said that it had been her fault. It was nearly as if she didn't take what she said seriously. For a moment she felt the urge to erase the ignorant fool's memory of the entire conversation. Or even more simple, to just punch her in the face. But she knew that Issei would hardly approve of something like that. But still her patience was running thin. Listen, Mrs. Hyodo, what I did was bad, really bad. So you did cheat on Issei's mother began to say. No, both she and Issei called out at nearly the same time. Raynor could not believe in what direction the conversation went. Of course that was the first they would think of. Humans, typical, she thought. And people said fallen angels were perverted. She frowned. Yuma wouldn't do that, Issei said. Except maybe if it was with Azazel, of course, he thought. She is not perfect. But this is not one of her mistakes. What happened is something different. I don't really want to talk about it. It is just, she made some decisions, someone told her things about me that weren't true, but she believed it and things went wrong between us because of it. The understatement of the year, he thought. But I still love her. Okay. Issei's father said now. It seems you really don't want to talk about whatever happened. But if you say you worked it out and that you love this girl, well, these girls, then we will accept it. Even if it is a bit unusual, he mentioned, looking from Yuma to Irina and back. I admit I had not thought that you would actually find girls who are willing to get along with this. Hey, haven't I told you many times? I am going to have a harem, Issei announced. This is just the beginning. Both of his parents' sweat dropped at his declaration. But none of them said anything. XXXXXXX Asgard for Odin, former king of Asgard in his own dimension and currently member of the Guardians. One thing was clear. He had messed up. He remembered how Issei Hyodo had fallen into the Juggernaut drive. Of course he had overcome it, and as it looked there would not even be lasting damage. But it was something that he should have prevented from happening in the first place. But in the end even gods and other super beings were prone to making mistakes, as he already knew from long experience. They had originally planned to deal with the problem of the soul fragments inside Issei's subconsciousness before they had allowed him to go on a mission like that. Just like they should have. For obvious reasons they had tried if possible to avoid the simple solution and just eliminate them. Despite only being parts of the souls of people who had long moved on, they were still a form of sentient life. But then Darien and most of the others suddenly had to take care of this line of potential threats in several other worlds first. And then Gariel had to run head first into all of this. In the end, nothing all too serious had happened. It was the usual routine. Both sides were making moves around each other, drawing lines, provoking reactions and manipulating the fates of entire worlds to their agenda. Still Odin knew all that didn't change the simple fact that he had made a mistake. He should have taken the matter into his own hands and helped Issei Hyodo to remove the possible threat before they left to stop Kokobiel and Crossel. But he had not thought of it, and this entire planet had been put at risk because of this. But Odin of all people knew that it solved nothing to ponder on mistakes that had once been made. In the moment he was in Asgard, together with his counterpart, Thor and the other Aesir of this world. Sometimes it nearly felt as if he was back home, at the time when the Thor and Loki of his world had still been alive, they and his wife, their mother. That however were the times when he got it pretty much slapped around his face that this was not his world and he wasn't home. Most of these incidents came pretty much down to one source, his own counterpart. A few days back the other Odin had actually invited him along to visit a strip club. Having nothing better to do and as he admitted, being still a bit depressed about his failure to deal with Issei's Juggernaut drive, he actually agreed. It ended up with him sitting around, not really interested, drinking one beer after the other, while his other self was celebrating the entire night and making advanced on several of the girls. All that while the Valkyrie who had been introduced as Rossweiss was desperately trying to keep him somewhat in line. From time to time his counterpart would encourage him to pay more attention to the half-naked women all around them. He and Rossweiss exchanged a short look, both of them were feeling the urge to just shrug with their shoulders. XXXXXXX the next day. Kuo Academy Raynor, Kalawarner, as well as Irina and Zenobia and of course Gariel had by now moved into the mansion that was serving as the headquarters of their group and made it their new home. School had started again for all of them, after the 2 weeks break. One of the first new developments was that Kuo Academy had gotten 4 new students. The first one was Maya Hyodo, alias Asia Argento, the new foster sister of Issei, Yuma Amano aka Raynor, Irina Shido and Zenobia Quarta. Everyone was staring at Issei as he arrived. Or more precisely at the fact that he was being surrounded by no less than 5 pretty girls as he did. The names of these 5 girls were first Irina, Yuma, Raynor and Asia, who was officially his foster sister. What surprised all of them the most? Murayama, captain of the Kendo club and one of the girls who Issei used to peek on and who were often seen attacking him because of it. And the last one was Ravel Phoenix. The pure blood devil had, only a few days after she had been freed by them, been enrolled into Kuo Academy and was now following Issei wherever he walked, claiming that he was her hero. Ironically, around the same time it came to a fallout between the houses of Grimoire and Phoenix following the duel and the cancellation of the engagement. The reason was talk about a secret agreement between members of the House of Grimoire and Issei Hyodo, to intentionally provoke Razor into an official fight, to get Rias Grimoire out of the marriage agreement. As it turned out, one of the fallen angels that were participating in her rescue had accidentally revealed this information to Ravel Phoenix. And she had told it to her parents. But of course, even though it was true, this changed nothing about the outcome. Since the stakes had been agreed upon the honor of both houses. But it still caused a visible dent in the relationship of both clans, that would probably take some time to repair. And an alliance between them of any sort certainly won't happen anywhere in the close future. Rias however knew perfectly well what was the reason for this. Gariel, that fallen angel had managed to pull a fast one on her again. But despite that, she admitted her and Issei's plan had saved her from actually being married off to Razor. XXX Some of the first people they met as they arrived at school were, not quite surprisingly, Matsuda and Motohama. Their reaction was also not quite surprising. Issei. Both of them shouted, "What is going on here? Why are you with an entire bunch of chicks? What have you done? Let me deal with them Issei darling," Raynor said to him with a bright smile, at the outside. "Hey, Matsuda and Motohama, right. How nice to see you again," she greeted the two in her best nice girl impression. Again? Motohama asked. "We have never seen you before," Matsuda cried out. "Yes, there is no way we would ever forget someone like you," Motohama exclaimed. "Especially this measurements," he stated, while adjusting his glasses and taking looks at Raynor's chest, upper body and her butt. "What are you saying?" Yuma exclaimed, making a shocked face. "How can you not remember me? I am Issei-kun's girlfriend after all." She was visibly pouting. "You are what?" they both yelled. "How could you not tell us that? Issei, you bastard," Matsuda shouted. "But he did. Do you really not remember? Yuma asked them. Think about it, she told them. In this moment she used her mental powers to restore their memories of their last meetings. Or better said, since their original memories had been erased, she used her own to recreate them. For her this was child's play. Her telepathic powers, that had already been formidable before, were now several times stronger after the training. She could now influence the minds of hundreds, maybe even thousands, of people at once if she wanted. If she wanted, she could have walked across the entire town naked and kept everyone from even noticing. Of course, that would somehow defeat the purpose of doing it in the first place. Not that she intended to actually do this. The two perverted boys were now staring at her in shock. I remember, Motohama stammered. Yuma. Yeah, how could we ever forget Yuma? Matsuda called out in shock. Yes, how could we ever forget these boobs? Motohama shouted, pointing directly at Raynor's chest, drawing the attention of a few students who were passing along. And looking at them with contempt. But since this was the perverted trio involved, it wasn't so unusual to them, and they just continued on their way. Maybe you just couldn't accept that your friend Issei would win a girl like me, while you are still single. And so you just forced it out of your mind. Yuma offered with a good dose of pride. Yes, that must it be, Motohama stated. We have just repressed it, Matsuda said. Sorry Yuma. And sorry Issei. We shouldn't have yelled at you like that. Don't worry. Whatever happened, it is all right now, right guys? Issei asked them. No harm done. They both nodded. Okay, but who are the other girls? Matsuda asked. I am Irina Shido. Irina introduced herself. Issei and I knew each other when we were children and I have returned to Kuo a short time ago. I am Maya Hyodo, Asia stated. Issei-kun's parents have taken me in, so I am now his foster sister. And they are both in love with Issei-kun too, and so I am sharing him with them, Yuma told them cheerfully. What? Matsuda and Motohama both called out. Their faces were now switching between deathly pale and bright red. Yes, you know Issei-kun is always talking about his plans to build a harem and I love him so much that I decided to agree to it. More like you are plagued with guilt and are scared out of your mind that Issei would give up on you for one of them, Raynor thought to herself. But she couldn't help to say that she enjoyed the completely flabbergasted looks on the two boys' faces. And this is Zenobia. And Ravel, she introduced the other two, she is something like a fangirl. A fangirl? Matsuda asked surprised. Yes, she adores Issei-kun and follows him everywhere, you will see. But I think we all should go to class now, right? Yes, she is right, Issei stated. If you excuse us, we will be off then. Raynor, why are you doing something like this? Irina asked her a few moments later. What do you mean? She asked innocently. You know exactly what Irina meant Raynor, Issei told her. Why were you toying with them like that? You could have just restored their memories the moment we met. Or not doing it at all. Instead you gave them their memories back right in the middle of your conversation. And why have you told them that we are with Issei-kun as well? Asia asked her. Okay, you are right. It is just that being a student here is kind of pointless for me. It is all just a facade for my cover identity. There is nothing to actually learn here for me that has a real worth. So if I really haven't anything else to do here, I can at least spend my time having some fun with our more simple-minded fellow students, right? In this moment Irina slapped her on the back of her head. Ouch. Why did you do this Irina? She asked. I am only doing what you wanted. You have told me to hit you over the head whenever you start to act like an arrogant bitch, remember? She grinned. Or have your problems with your memory as well? She asked, teasing her. Okay. I swear I will not harm anyone, and I won't use my powers on anybody, Yuma said. Good. But that doesn't mean that I can't have some fun, right? Maybe you should try it as well. But M were not the last students they met. XXX. Murayama, what in the world are you doing here with Hyodo of all people? They heard Katase, a pink-haired girl, one of the other members of the Kendo Club and her best friend, cry out as she saw all of them together at the corridor before their classroom. Oh, we are just Issei-kun's new harem, Raynor announced before Murayama herself had even the chance to speak. And Murayama here is our honor member, since she was able to ride him longer than any other of us did last night, she claimed. The girls all felt how their jaws dropped. Saying something like that to the two members of the perverted trio was one thing, but this. Issei only looked at her in surprise, but then he grinned. Yuma. Murayama was now literally screaming at her, completely red in the face. Why in the world are you saying something like that? Mur. Tell me that is not true. Katase, a bit green in the face, stammered. Of course not, she called out. It is just that. Issei helped me a few days ago, when I had been attacked by a few guys. I could have probably taken care of it by myself. But I am not quite sure. It were two after all. But with both of us there, we easily scared them off. So I decided to give Hyodo a chance, even if he is a pervert, he added. Really? Katase asked surprised. They all realized at this point that Yuma was shaking from barely suppressed laughter and holding her sides. Really? You should have seen your faces, she giggled. You. Katase nearly growled. But the offer stands if any of you two want to ride me, Issei now remarked grinning. Pervert, Murayama and Katase exclaimed at the same time. Their sentiments seemed to be shared by the other students standing around, who were watching the exchange. Oh, you two are just too serious about all this, Raynor, Yuma stated. This is Yuma. She is Issei's girlfriend, Murayama introduced her. Well, they make a perfect couple it seems. Katase frowned. She is obviously a pervert as well. Here we fully agree, Yuma said, holding Issei by the arm. And who are the others? Katase wanted to know. The four remaining girls exchanged a short look with each other. Then they smirked. I am Irina Shido. I am happy to meet you. I am Issei-kun's other girlfriend, she said, taking his other arm. What? Katase cried out. She could not quite believe what she had just heard. I am Issei's new foster sister Maya, Asia claimed. But I am going to be his lover as well, she said and wrapped her arms around Issei's body. I am Ravel Phoenix, and I intend to become a member of his harem as well, she stated openly, not ashamed at all. Neither Katase or any of the other students said anything. Sorry Murayama, it seems we have broken your friend, Raynor stated a moment later. They looked at Katase who was only staring at them with an open mouth, seemingly unable to say anything. Don't worry about it, Murayama replied. Katase is tough. I am sure she will be okay when she has managed to accept the fact that Issei has now actually success with some girls. As long as I don't tell her that I decided to become a member of your little harem as well, she will be able to take it. Oh come on. We both know you want to, Raynor teased her. Don't overdo it Yuma, Murayama told her. And you, someone asked Zenobia, don't tell us you were with Hyodo as well. No, I am actually Yudo-kun's girlfriend, she responded. What? At least a dozen girls around cried out as they heard this, a few of them in rage. The prince of Kuo Academy, who most girls in the school, nearly all of them included, had their eyes on, now had a girlfriend. This also seemed to shake Katase back out of her shocked state, and right into another one. You are Kiba's? She asked. Yes, she answered stoically. Come now, it is getting late. We have to get to class, she said to the others and they went on the rest of their way. You were right by the way Raynor, Irina whispered to her a few seconds later, this was kind of fun, seeing their faces. But our reputation? Who cares about that? Yuma replied. It is not as if we actually need to go to school. Speak only for yourself, Murayama stated. I can only hope that they all will get it into their heads that I am one of the few people here who are not Hyudo's girlfriend. Yet, Raynor added tauntingly. Shut up. XXX. The classes had started. Everything was more or less back to normal. Well, except for the detail that all 5 of the girls, including Murayama, had been asked a dozen times by a dozen different people, if they were truly all with Hyodo or if it had all just been a joke. After giving the same answer over and over again, even Raynor had enough. Humans, she thought. How could one species produce so many interesting people and so many idiots at the same time? She asked herself. XXX. Another notable difference was that Issei had stopped peeking on the girls' locker rooms, together with Matsuda and Motohama, and even apologized to the girls of the Kendo Club at one point, Well, in some way. Since his apology included telling them all how much he still admired their bodies and the size of their breasts, but that he had been doing it in the wrong way, many of them were still sending him angry or at least confused glared. But in the end they left it at that. XXX they all used the time to catch up with their friends and the students they knew about what they had done during the last 2 weeks. XXX Murayama for example was back with her kendo club for their training. Right now she was however training with 3 of her teammates at the same time and easily dominating them. Not only had she grown stronger and faster during the 2-week training, her new telepathic abilities, to practically read their intentions before they were doing something, gave her an enormous advantage over her opponents. If she wanted she could have probably taken the entire club at the same time, and actually she was holding back, because she didn't want to reveal to her friends that she now could actually be considered superhuman. Even if it was still on a low level. Her teammates of course were surprised and shocked at the unbelievable level of progress she had made. Tell me, what the hell have you done at this 2-week trip? Katase asked her. XXXXXXX another surprise came for Issei a week later, when he got a call from Rias if he could meet her. Raynor, Irina, Asia and Ravel of course insisted to come with him, just in case the devil wanted to make a move on him without them knowing first. Zenobia was coming along as well, also because she wanted to visit Yudo. What Rias then revealed to them however was something completely different. She informed them that her peerage had another member, one that they never heard of before and who had taken part in neither the training or the raiding game. In fact, he had been hiding away the entire time, and she wanted to ask Issei to help her servant with his problems. Not only that, this member, a bishop, was a half-vampire with an extremely rare talent that allowed him to temporarily stop time. And you only bothered to mention this now? Issei had asked her angrily. He continued to give her a talk down about her sheer stupidity of not mentioning this fact earlier. As she then introduced this servant to them, well, he was not what any of them would have expected. What they found was a small young boy, Gaspar, as Rias said his name was, who was wearing a girl's school uniform. Actually he was looking pretty much like a girl. He had unusual pointed ears, that identified him as non-human or at least hybrid to anyone who paid enough attention, and to everyone's shock, was spending his time hiding inside a carton box. That was because he seemed to be afraid of practically everything from the outside world, including them. Even the usually sarcastic Raynor was too stunned by the appearance of the boy, to even say anything. Issei, Irina, Zenobia and especially Asia finally agreed to help Gaspar to come out of his shell, in the truest sense of the word, and spend the next weeks talking to him, training with him and doing generally everything to get him used to having other people around. Even Raynor, Ravel and finally Gariel joined in on their efforts. Even if their successes were mixed. Zenovia's help, for example, consisted in the beginning of chasing him around on the school grounds with a drawn sword, an event that Rias later erased from the minds of several students who had seen it. His powers, on the other hand, when he actually used them, turned out to be exactly what they were promised. Gaspar was able to stop time on the entire area around the school. As it turned out, however, carrying the sword of Cronus made Issei not only completely immune to his power, even without using his key manipulation, it also allowed him to counter it to a large degree. So training with Gaspar in the end even gave Issei a better control of his new weapon. XXXXXXX 2 months had now passed since the fight against Kokobiel. Most of them had in this time continued to train. Raynor and Asia for example had realized that the Phoenix Flame that was combined with their Twilight healing had also increased their own energy and magical potential. Beside that, it also allowed them to regrow their own strength during a fight and gave both of them theoretically an endless stamina. At least purely physical. Of course in Asia's case, while she had somewhat been trained in combat, she was still mostly concentrating on her abilities as a healer. While for Raynor it was the other way around. It was now about 2 weeks ago that she had gained her third set of wings. Irina and Zenobia had, aside from training their fighting abilities even further, learned to better communicate with the soul shards of Merlin that had been embedded inside their weapons and use their magical knowledge for themselves. Gariel and Calawarner on the other side had not been in their best state after Kokobiel battle. Both had retreated somewhat into themselves, while Gariel of course still acted as their connection to the rest of the Guardians. Calawarner had taken the loss of Donasek quite hard. Probably harder than most of the others would have expected. The two had known each other for a long time, a very long one by human standards. And while they had only been lovers from time to time, they had been quite close in their own way. With Gariel it was a bit different. She had known that the man she had loved was gone and replaced by a monster for a long time. For years she had hoped that it might be possible to bring him back to his senses. That hope had been quickly shattered as she had heard about what he was planning, the many people he had killed and his justifications. But that didn't mean that it was easy for her. Odin was staying in contact with them, but he was spending most of his time in Asgard, with the counterparts of his friends and family. During that time a line of things had changed in the supernatural world. The first and probably most important one was a meeting between the leaders of the three factions that Azazel had called, where he had officially offered a peace treaty between them. As the Securut, Issei was also taking part in it, just like his rival Valley. This meeting however was being attacked by a group of Chaos Brigade that belonged to the Old Mao faction, under the leadership of a woman named Kateria Leviathan, a descendant of the original Leviathan of course. Their plan to capture Gaspar and use his powers to their own advantage however was foiled and they were beaten back quite quickly. Kateria herself was killed during the fight by Azazel and Chaos Brigade retreated, for the moment. Another shock came as Valley Lucifer revealed himself to be a traitor and a member of Chaos Brigade and joined the retreating terrorists. Only for Azazel to take this back just a few minutes after they were gone and reveal smugly that he was actually a double agent working for him the entire time. It was one of the few times where Issei truly wanted to punch the man in the face. Another, on the first look more harmless incident happened another week after the peace meeting. When Issei woke up someday, the naked bodies of Raynor and Asia lying next to him and he saw a stranger standing in front of his bed. This stranger, he realized, was a very young girl. Dressed in a gothic Lolita outfit. She had dark hair and completely expressionless eyes. Wah! Issei called out. Issei Hyodo, the girl said, I was interested to meet you. He realized that the stranger was hiding her own presence. This was clearly not a normal girl by any means. In this moment Raynor and Asia were waking up as well and saw the invader, in Issei's bedroom. Who the fuck are you? Raynor exclaimed. I am sorry fallen angel, I am not here to disturb you, she said without any emotion. I have not introduced myself. I am Ophis, the Infinity Dragon. What? Raynor whispered. She realized how she had just been talking to one of the most powerful entities in this universe. At least Ophis didn't seem to take offense on her tone. Beings this powerful usually are not staggered by mere words. But there were always exceptions as she had learned. Note to self, she thought. Learn to keep your temper in check. At least until you have learned to become all-powerful yourself. Ophis was now just been staring at Issei for a few moments, equally emotionless looking as before. I have measured your power and your magical potential Issei Hyodo, she informed him. But as it seems you are not even close to having reached your full power. I will come back to you when you have become stronger, she stated. The next moment she was gone, having simply disappeared as simply as she had come. Ophis, Issei said quietly. As it seems you are drawing the attention of the most interesting people Issei-kun, Raynor commented, still shaken up from the bizarre meeting. Then there had also been one other, far more personal chance for Issei, something that both Odin and Azazel had confirmed about 6 weeks ago. He had turned immortal. While he was still vulnerable to injuries, even with extremely good healing, he would never truly age anymore. It had been a side effect of his own modifications on his body while he was under the influence of the Juggernaut drive. The Guardians had offered him a choice to live forever or not. Now he had unconsciously made that choice. But if it came to side effects, Issei could have truly imagined worse things than this. 60 days after the Kokobiel battle it was what Issei and the others had at first thought would be a completely normal day. Instead they found both Gariel and Odin standing in front of the Hyodo residence this morning. Issei. Good morning, she greeted him. There is something we need to talk about. I have just been informed by the boss. He knew that was the way she often referred to Darien. We have been given a new mission. What kind of mission? Issei asked in the moment they were alone in his room. The kind of mission that will need us to leave our universe for a while and travel to one of the neighboring ones. We have, as it looks, found several breaches in the borders between the dimensions around the reality we have dubbed Universe 1125-12. So that means the 12th close variant of this world that we have discovered. That means there will be more doubles of us. Irina, who had spent the night in Issei's house, along with Raynor, asked. Yes. Of course that doesn't mean that we will necessarily meet them, Gabriel replied. But by what I have seen from the information from our scouts, it might be actually interesting. The Issei of that universe seem to be quite different from you, she stated. Breaches in the barriers between the realities means what exactly? Irina asked. It means that someone is walking around in this world who doesn't belong there. And it seems to be more than one person, Gabriel answered. But it doesn't mean that whoever it is has to be dangerous or even necessarily an enemy. Maybe someone had been displaced by an accident or something like that. We will have to find out. But don't misunderstand. It also could be an enemy. I cannot come with you, Odin offered. You know my reasons. Indeed, they knew. It was some kind of unofficial agreement that came to be between the two sides of the interdimensional war. As long as the stronger representatives of one of them won't enter a particular reality, the others will do the same thing. The only reason Odin's presence here was being tolerated was that he had officially left the Guardians and intended to stay in this reality for good. He was no longer an official fighter in this war. But if he would come with them to this world, it would be an invitation to the other side to send a warrior with equal or even greater power, and it might in the end lead to an apocalyptic battle. Let us tell the others and prepare everything, Gabriel told him. We will meet at the mansion in 2 hours. XXXXXXX like she had said, barely 115 minutes later they all were assembled in front of the restored old building. Issei had already called Sona and told her that they would be gone for at least a few days. She would take care of things in school for them. They had agreed that Issei, Gabriel, Irina, Raynor and Kalawarner would be the ones to go on this mission, while Zenobia and Murayama would stay behind to keep an eye on things here. Even if Murayama admitted she was actually looking out for the chance to visit another parallel world and she was kind of disappointed. But the others promised her that she would come along for their next expedition. Gabriel activated the device that she was carrying on her arm, that allowed them access to the portal system of the Guardians. Moments later the portal formed itself in the air before them, and after passing through, they found themselves somewhere else. XXX. They were somewhere else and yet still in Kuo. We are still in the same place as before, aren't we? Asia questioned. Look around, Kalawarner stated. The mansion, the same house they had been living in for the last months, was now suddenly a complete ruin. It was clear on the first look that this version of the building had never been renovated. Instead it had fallen in even greater disrepair. This was their hometown, and yet not. So they were walking through the other version of Kuo. Raynor and Gabriel were using their mental powers to make sure that nobody would recognize them. Just in case some of their doubles were known here for one reason or the other. As long as they were human, everybody would just see a faceless group of random people, and their abilities were now strong enough to even deceive most regular devils if they didn't pay too much attention. The source of one of the breaches is not far away, Gabriel told them, as she checked some of the displays on the device she was carrying on her arm. The others also seem to be located in the region of Japan. The most prominent is close to the area of Kyoto. XXXXXXX back in their own universe it was 2 days after Issei and his team had left. This seemed to be going to be another "usual" morning in Kuo. At least at the first look. It was about 11 in the morning, as every supernatural being or supernatural skilled human in the town was sensing the powerful energies that were suddenly raising up. It seemed to be not only one but several presences that had appeared right at the city border. Most of these presences, however, while somewhat different, felt incredibly familiar to them. Both the Grimoire and the Sea-Tree Peerage, just as Zenobia and Murayama who were with them at school, wasted no time and teleported right to the place where the "foreign" energies came from. They arrived a short distance from the location of their targets and simply walked the rest of the way. What they found surprised them to the point that none of them knew how to say something. In front of them was a large group of people, all of them sitting or even lying between a group of trees. They all looked somewhat exhausted. But it was who these people were what shocked them. It was Issei, Asia and Irina, and Raynor as they now saw. The fallen angel had just been flying around the place and was now landing right next to Issei. We are exactly where we are supposed to be, she said, at the outskirts of the town, and we have visitors Issei darling, she announced. I see, he replied, turning to look at Rias and the others who just arrived. There were also 2 other fallen angels present under the arrivals Rias had never seen before. And close to them was standing a young human girl. But also in her they could sense a strange supernatural power as well. But it wasn't this part of the group of newcomers that truly unsettled her. She was looking at one of the strangers, and saw into her own face. One of the arrivals was Rias Grimori, looking just like herself, down to the school uniform she was wearing, and her entire peerage. Another Akino, Kiba, Kaneko, even Gaspar was there. There was also a second Xenovia, just like the girl standing a few meters from her. And not only them, there was also a double of Sona and several members of her peerage, looking exactly like her friend who was standing right next to Rias. Another member of that group who shocked and intimidated especially Kaneko was nobody else than her older sister Kuroka, standing between their doubles as if it was the most normal thing in the world. All of the new arrivals were now looking in their direction at Raynor's declaration. Rias and the others were sure about one thing however, even without the presence of their own doubles here, this Issei, Asia, Irina and Raynor were not the same as the ones who had left their world just 2 days earlier. Issei had some of the presence of a devil, it seemed for some reason however mixed with some other energies. Unlike the devil version of Issei they had already met however, he had not just a mix of Dedrag's power and the evil pieces. There was also some other source involved. This Irina here was an angel. Even without the bright energy she was radiating this would be clear to everyone since she had her wings out. And the second Xenovia was in fact a devil as well. Who are you? Rias asked them angrily. I think who we are would be kind of obvious, Rias replied. I know that, Rias yelled. We have seen interdimensional doubles before. Believe me, you are nothing really new to us. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we can trust you. She couldn't help it, but something at this situation just riled her up. She felt pretty much out of control of the situation. And having another version of herself looking at her so confidently certainly didn't help. Stand down, all of you, she addressed herself, and the other doubles. We will detain you for the moment. Until we decide what to do with you. Do you agree Sona? She asked the Cetri heiress. But the other Rias only rolled with her eyes. It truly seems I am an arrogant bitch no matter what universe, she stated smiling. Detain us. You will find out that this is harder than you might think. As she said this, the group around her began to power up, and shocked everyone even more than before. Issei's counterpart, his power rivaled that of a Mao. His energy was a nearly bizarre mix out of dragons and devil power. The other Raynor, she materialized 4 more sets of wings. She had 10. She was a Cadre-level fallen angel, they realized in horror, remembering the last time they faced one of them 2 months earlier. They could only hope that this version of her wasn't hostile. Akino's counterpart transformed into a form that as well closely resembled a fallen. To their shock they saw that she possessed 8 wings, and she was playing, with a surge lightning right in her hand, those strength was just frightening. And Rias' own double. They realized that she had the power of a ultimate class devil, at least. Kuroka's strength was already known to all of them, and if at all had even grown for this version here. Some of the others showed a terrifying power as well. They realized that this, their other selves, were a force that could take on an entire army of devils or angels and win. We are not your enemies, Issei addressed them. We won't hurt you. But you shouldn't believe that you control us, Rias added. We will come with you, and we will explain to you why we are here. But only because we want to, Issei told them. XXX they all would have been even more terrified if they had seen the small figure who had come with them, but had separated itself from them just after they had arrived. It was the same little gothic Lolita, who Issei had found inside his bedroom just a few weeks earlier, the Infinity Dragon, Ophis. Kuo, in an alternate universe. The small group of people consisting of Issei Hyodo, Asia Argento, Irina Shido and the fallen angels Raynor, Calawarner and Gariel was still walking through the streets town, while at the same time using their mental powers to keep themselves from being recognized from anyone who might notice them and know their identities. Of course, none of them were really the same people who had been born in this world. They came from a different reality, another universe, and they were here for a special reason. Being a small and new part of the group of interdimensional protectors, commonly known as the Guardians, they came here to deal with a number of unknown breaches into this universe. They were already coming close to the first of these breaches they had detected. The first one that, as they had found out, was right here in Kuo. Instead of data of the small, sci-fi-like devices that Gariel was carrying around with her, they were however simply following the directions Didrag gave to them. This way, the dragon said to Issei and the others. How far is it, Didrag? Irina asked him. I swear, I will go and teach you all how to sense time-space anomalies by yourself, he replied, annoyed. And if it is only to get you from asking me that the entire time. Or rather, Issei will, after I have shown him, he added. These guardians actually should have taught you that themselves. Then you wouldn't have to rely on these silly devices you are carrying around, fallen angel. They would have, if there had been more time, Gariel explained. But so they had to mostly concentrate on basic key manipulation, combat and some telepathic powers. Says the girl who made sure that we had to quit the training 2 days early, Raynor commented dryly. But her decision in the end saved Kuo, Asia pointed out. No, it didn't. Our meddling was actually the reason Kokobiel started his attack earlier, Raynor replied. Issei-kun went into Juggernaut Drive and nearly destroyed Kuo himself and could have killed us all, because we run into battle before the Guardian had neutralized it. And all that because of Miss I will settle things with my ex-lover, here, she remarked. Not that I am necessarily the one to talk here, given how things could have ended up between us, right, Issei-kun? She turned to him. They both had heard what happened in some of the other universes. For a moment Calawarner was looking at them with a grim expression. They all knew that Donasek had died in that battle. I know I messed up back then. You know I am sorry, Gariel reminded them. Don't worry, like we said, we forgive you, Calawarner said grimly. The Lord knows we have all done our part of crap. Yes, she must have truly gone soft, she thought. But that won't keep us from bringing it up again, whenever we think you need a reminder, she added a bit sharply. We have nearly arrived, Didrag informed them. Hold up. Didrag, are you really sure? Issei questioned. I mean, he just realized that they were just arriving at the street and they were heading right in the direction where his house was. Yes, I know. The breach is nearly directly at your home. What? Issei called out. Don't worry, Irina told him. Everything around is still intact, right? So whatever the breach is obviously not that dangerous. They could now already make out Issei's home, in a few hundred meters distance. Not that dangerous, you say? They suddenly heard another voice speaking up. Now, saying it like this is nearly an insult, don't you think? The voice said sarcastically. I am actually quite dangerous. As they all turned round they saw its source. What they saw was an old man. He had short gray hair and a beard and was wearing a Victorian-looking black coat. Oh no, Gariel said as she recognized him, rolling her eyes. Not him, she murmured. Now, if this isn't a completely new generation of the brave defenders of the multiverse, the man announced in a quite sarcastic tone, discussing what went wrong on their last missions. It seems we have found the source of the first dimensional breach, Gariel told them. You mean it is him? Irina questioned. He is the source of the first breach. Yes, she replied. Like us, he is a being who can move between the universes. Another one, Calawarner commented. In a sense I guess you could say that, the old man stated. I am just on my own business in this world. In this moment they could feel the stranger's presence. That he had clearly been hiding from them until now. It was powerful, there was no doubt. Especially since they knew that barely anyone ever showed his full strength from the beginning. So it was hard to say just how powerful he truly was. His aura, they realized, was also somewhat similar to Gaspar, or to the Guardian Vlad or Alucard, like he was also called. Was this guy another vampire? They asked themselves. He is. Didrag confirmed to Issei. He is however somehow different from the others we have seen. The dragon stated. Just like Gaspar is very different from Vlad, Issei thought. Yes. It might simply be that this one is from yet another different world. Zelrech. Gariel greeted him, visible unnerved. You know this guy? Issei asked her, surprised. Yes. He is, well, you could say something like a loose associate. Our organization came across him several times in the past. He and his allies have similar goals like us. Well, most of the time anyway, Gariel explained with some scorn. XXXXXXX somewhere else in Japan many miles away, the Issei Hyodo of this world was currently on a quite bit similar mission. Together with his own team. Like it was said before, this Issei was actually quite different from the ones they had already met before. He had neither been turned into a devil or into a immortal interdimensional warrior. And while this version of him was human, he was all but average. The greatest difference, however, was possible that this Issei didn't have the same perverted mindset that most of his counterparts possessed. This one was not focused on women's breasts since his childhood, and he didn't dream about having a harem. No, his dream had been something else. Something quite different. He had always wanted to be a hero. It was something he had been dreaming about since he was a child. In fact, he and his version of Irina had often been playing this together. That was of course before she, just like the Irina of the other world, had moved to England, and they had not seen each other for several years. The two old friends had been reunited just a few months back. As they had found out, however, their lives had taken a similar path, in a quite tragic way. Today Issei Hyodo was a holy sword wielder and, at least for the moment, working for the church. Just like his old friend Irina, who he had recently been reunited with. Their small group, consisting of them, and their partners Zenobia Quarta and the counterpart of Yuto Kiba of this world, was currently here on a mission. Another one. Originally Irina, Zenobia and their comrade came to this country to deal with the fallen angel leader Kokobiel's plot to steal a couple of holy swords and restart the Great War, a few weeks ago. It was at this time Irina had met once again with Issei, the Security, and he had joined their group. Shortly after they managed to stop Kokobiel in a short alliance with the Devils of Kuo, they stayed a bit longer to watch over the peace meeting of the three factions. Afterwards they stayed in the area for a bit longer. It was then 2 days ago that they had been informed about a line of strange sightings and people who had gone missing in this area. And since they were already here, the church had told them to investigate in this case as well. The story had started with a star that had suddenly appeared on the sky the night 4 days ago. XXXXXXX. It was little more than a half week ago a strange new object had appeared in the sky over this region for a short time. For everyone who had seen it from the ground, it had seemed to be a shooting star, a meteor or small comet, as it had been burning up in the atmosphere, falling down to Earth. It was something that had come from outside of this world, from space, and in fact from even beyond that. Exactly the same object was now on the ground, lying in the center of a crater, where it had landed, somewhere in a mostly unpopulated forests, somewhere in the area between Kuo and Kyoto. What had fallen from space and landed here was a large metallic construction, streamlined, formed and in a dark gray, nearly black color, able to move through the air. The object was in fact nothing else than a vehicle to travel the stars, a spaceship. Or better said, it was a vessel that was able to move both, between the stars and even between the dimensions. XXXXXXX. Not far away from that place, a gruesome scene was taking place. On the ground, somewhere in the middle of the forest, miles away from the next town, were laying the bodies of an entire family, a man, a woman, a little boy and a girl. It was just a family that came here for a camping trip, not knowing that they would be traveling to their doom. Around them were standing 3 figures, wearing futuristic clothes and armor and carrying equally futuristic-looking guns, their faces being hidden behind helmets and masks. One of the bodies, however, the woman, was still moving. In panic she was trying to crawl away from the beings who had just mercilessly slaughtered her family. You know the orders, one of the figures said to another, shorter one, who was standing next to the fleeing wounded woman. They have come too close. All of them are to be eliminated. I understand, the other one replied, aimed its weapon at the neck of its target, and fired. The being looked down at the not motionless corpse. A few moments later the being, took off its helmet. Beneath was a human face. It was the face of a dark-haired young girl, not more than a teenager. XXXXXXX Kuo. With Issei's guardian group, their group was still standing in opposite to the mysterious old man. This means he is an ally, right? Issei asked her. No. At least not directly, Gariel explained. Like I said, a loose associate. We might have mostly similar goals. But our organizations don't really have anything to do with each other. And we cooperate only seldom. Why is that? Irina asked. There is a line of reasons, she replied. You should realize that there is much more out there than just us and the Dark Order. We both have our own problems and our own ways to do things. Yes, that is one way to put it, isn't it? The old man stated. Your organization is always so serious about the way you work. He smiled at her. If you mean we don't make things unnecessarily complicated for our own amusement, then yes, she responded. Tell me, what was your name again, Fallen Angel? Gariel was it, right? Ah yes, I remember you. How long was it? 70 or was it 80 years that I met you and your group? Back then you had still been a wet behind the ears recruit in your team. He grinned even more. And now look at you, standing here with your own group of rookies, and discussing how you messed up. How time is passing, and how little things change, right my dear? The frown Gariel already had on her face only deepened even more. That is another one of the reasons we aren't cooperating often. Zelrech is a Chayot and an unpredictable troll, who is just as likely to play around with his allies as help them, she commented. Sounds very promising, Raynor remarked sarcastically. The old man only chuckled. How true, how true. He started to laugh. Now, why don't you introduce your new comrades and me to each other? He asked. Gariel suppressed the urge to roll with her eyes again. As you wish, she stated. Issei, Raynor, Irina, Asia and Kalawarner. She pointed from one of them to the other. This is Kisher Zelrech Schweinerg, a mortal magician, a leading member of the mages associations in his world and one of the vampires known as the Dead Apostles, she introduced the stranger. All of them tried, more or less successful, to suppress a grin, as they heard the name. Except for Irina, who broke out into laughter. Kisker Zelrech Schweinerg, she pressed out giggling. Very funny Gariel. Now, what is this guy's real name? Suddenly they saw that Zelrech was no longer standing in front of them, but right behind Irina and Asia who was standing next to her. Both of them gasped. They hadn't even seen him move. Do you have a problem with my name, little girl? He asked Irina, now sounding actually menacingly. This guy truly was dangerous. Despite the careless attitude he had shown so far. And no, she stammered a bit shocked. Good. What are you doing here, Zelrech? Gariel asked him. He shrugged with the shoulders. What shall I say? I have my eyes on someone in this world who seems quite interesting to me. A possible client. I have of course also noticed the, as you would call it, breaches between the worlds. But it seems, as I found out, that my possible candidate is already trying to take care of things. What kind of a candidate is that? Issei wanted to know. Well, it is kind of interesting that you ask that, my friend. It is a human who had caught my attention some time ago. The version of him in this world is a holy sword wielder. Zelrech smiled. His name is Issei Hyodo. Just like yours, right? In some distance from them, Issei could see his home, or at least the exact copy of it that existed in this universe. In this moment he saw someone leaving the house. It was his own mother, looking exactly like he knew her from his world. And she was walking in their direction. He was glad right now that she wouldn't recognize them, thanks to Raynor's and Gariel's power. If she had, he wouldn't know what to even say to her. XXXXXXX The region around Kyoto, deep inside the vessel that had arrived on this world 4 days ago, the commander of the ship was sitting in the command center and looking through their discoveries of the last days. They had been sending out scouts and probes, ever since they had, not quite willingly, arrived here, and they had cleared up the surrounding area from any interlopers. With other words, they were killing everyone who just happened to be there to make sure their presence stayed undiscovered. At least for now. Still, they weren't able to stop some of the rumors their crash landing had caused, and the disappearance of these people was alone cause for some more. And the reason Issei Hyodo and his team of exorcists were sent to this region in the first place. But the inhabitants of the ship weren't aliens. Not in the actual sense at least. Genetically they were human, or as close to it as possible. Their entire civilization, had been genetically modified even before conception, improved, perfected, from birth, on. They had been given access to powers that normally only one out of thousands normal, humans possessed. They were beings from another dimension. Not any one, but the same world the Guardians originated from. The commander was just overseeing the reports on the world they had landed in. Like the rest of his crew, he was gifted with both superhuman and supernatural powers that were interwoven with their DNA. All in the name of the Lords and the Great Master himself. They were the next step of human evolution. They were all created, bred, raised and trained to serve as warriors for the great cause of the Dark Order. He was not exactly happy about what he read. By what they found out, in this world the human race was still in their early 21st century. But that was not what bothered him. Besides humanity, they found that there were also several races of supernatural entities who were occupying this planet, who were oppressing, manipulating and abusing their non-augmented brethren for their own gain. The most notorious of them were the so-called devils, a race of demon breed, who was actually enslaving them and turning some of them into their own kind. But also the fallen angels and even this world's version of the church. It was a state that every fiber of his being found intolerable. It was an insult. He knew what his race, even the not enhanced version, was capable of, and it was more than this. They found this part of the information from one of these supernaturals they had captured and interrogated. In the end he took great pleasure from ending the creature's life himself. They were not supposed to be here, he knew. It was just an accident during the last battle that had sent them into this dimension. But now that they were here, he would not let this situation continue. No matter how brutal the methods were he had to use. Somewhere else, another, much smaller, object was lying, that had also crashed on the surface of this planet. The pilot was not sitting far away, next to a self-made campfire. This pilot was a member of the Green Lantern Corps, who had crash-landed here, just like the other group, after the last battle. They had been on a mission to find out about the location of a very dangerous creature that they had been warned about. But as it turned out they were not the only ones looking for this being. They were confronted with a ship of the SHA, that had the same objective. The fight ended with them being transferred to this world. Home dimension of the Guardians, Darien admitted, as he had received the message from Odin and the Devils Rias Grimori and Sona Citri a short time ago, he wasn't quite sure what to think. A breach between the dimensions in their world, and not only a single person or a few, but a group of about 24 had appeared. Most of them were alternates of the same persons they had been visiting them not long ago. Issei Hyodo, Asia Argento, Raynor, another Rias Grimori and Sona Citri and their entire peerages, some others. A short time after their arrival, they had all been brought to the home dimension of the Guardians for the time being. And the story they were telling them at this moment did nothing to ease the tension of everyone present at all. Of course he could have easily read the minds of most, and more likely all, of them to find out all the information. But that was something he would only do if he actually had to. Reading superficial feelings and thoughts was one thing. But intentionally reaching into others' minds with the purpose to get information. That was something he would only do when it was necessary. Not only would it be considered incredible impolite by the definition of practically every civilized world known, it could also easily be the first of possible many steps to corrupt yourself. And here it was clearly not necessary anyway. They were already telling them the entire story anyway. The being who was in these days calling himself Darien had been many things in his long existence. A long time ago, when he was still a mortal living in the former Roman colony of Britannia, he had been a knight of the Round Table. He had watched how his father had been exiled, simply because he had loved the wrong woman, and had even been willing to leave him and his mother behind for it. It was something his younger mortal self, like most normal people, should normally have deeply resented him for. But he also understood, even back then, that his father no longer had a real choice after being found out. Besides that, he also knew all too well, even at his young age, that his father's marriage to his own mother, just like so many others, had been not exactly voluntary from both sides, but more the result of social pressures and political intrigues. The saddest part of it all was, normally this would have been nothing special. Nobody outside of their own family would have even cared. Men were leaving their women and even their children behind all the time in that age. Only in their case the new woman just happened to be the wife of the king. So it had become a legendary fabled romantic tale, told over countless centuries, instead of a matter nobody would have cared about a couple of weeks later. He had seen how political and religious leaders had been preaching either total devotion or free will. And then went manipulating everyone and everything and used every underhanded method to reach their personal goals, no matter if these methods went against everything they were preaching in public. He had seen how the people on top of every possible society, human, alien or otherwise, had always expected complete loyalty from the people beneath them. But were in turn often willing to sell out everyone else in the blink of an eye. He had watched people of thousands of different societies, claiming to be civilized, and then ruthlessly slaughtering people outside of their own civilization, calling their victims barbarians. While at the same time acting like the worst kind of savages themselves. Yes, civilized, hypocrisy and double standards were something he knew all too well. All too often he could truly understand how some of the lords became what they were today. There had to be a point where you just have enough of all that crap, and you only wanted to see the world to change, even if that meant seeing it burn. XXX He had watched how his old comrade Mordred, who had been born and raised simply as a means for others in a quest for the throne, had gone mad with hatred and revenge on everyone around him and pledged himself to the darkness. All the way until he became the lord who was today calling himself Faust. He had been fighting with Mordred over the Holy Grail, in the end both of them absorbing its power, and both of them forever losing their mortality. He had known many friends, comrades and associates. There had also been some women in his life during the centuries. A few when he had still been mortal, many others later. Some have grown close to him, others did not. In most cases because there had never been the chance. The most of them were long gone either way, dying a long time ago. At best he could conjure their spirits to talk to these people from time to time. Some, however, had become immortal like himself and in some cases, were still around. He had over the course of centuries seen some originally mortal beings evolving and so growing into immortals, cosmic entities and gods. He himself and a few others being the best example. But he knew perfectly well that even beings like him could be surprised or taken off guard if the circumstances were right. Like today. It was something that he considered normally kind of refreshing, and in a strange way, consoling. It reminded him that he wasn't all-powerful, not completely at least, and that at his core, he was still the same person who had been born all these centuries ago. You could say it made him feel human. Like most powerful entities, he knew the risk of losing himself all too well. He himself had watched more than one being fall to that fate. For the most part, he was always trying to keep his powers in check, to keep them on a more than reasonable level. That allowed him for the most time to lead what most people would consider a more or less normal existence, instead of a being that transits time and space. Being a god, that was something he had never wanted. He was born a human being, and from his convictions he was a monotheist, a sort of Christian, more or less. Even when he simply had experienced too much to be stuck in the mindset of a single religion. He knew perfectly well, of course, that there were many other gods and similar beings in the multiverse. He himself could easily considered as one of them. But the only entity who he, in his personal view, truly saw as actually being God, was the one who existed in all realities, even if he had countless manifestations. XXXXXXX Rias Grimori and her brother, the Mouseers X Lucifer, had traveled to the world of the Guardians for the second time. The first had been during the 2-week training trip her peerage and Issei's team had made 2 months ago. Now they were both here again, together with the leaders of the other factions, Azazel and Michael, who had, as they heard that an entire group of doubles of some known devils and fallen angels had suddenly appeared, had of course come as well. Both had arrived, together with a small contingent of 6 and 8 winged angels and fallen as guards. Sona Sitri and her queen Tsubaki also came with them this time. They all had taken in the surroundings of the strange futuristic version of Earth with fascination. Now they all were sitting together inside what seemed to be a very large conference room, somewhere inside the large building complex where they had been living in during the training. Next to them were standing some leading members of the Guardians, and in front of them all, the assembled group of their guests. Now they were all sitting together and listening to their story, and it was worse than the Guardians first thought. XXXXXXX. A short time ago, the first meeting between the faction leaders and these new arrivals, however, had gone a bit unexpected, and a bit awkward. The second Rias Grimori had, in the moment she saw her brother, thrown her arms around him and literally jumped into his arms. Oni-san, she had called out, I am so happy to see you again, she said with tears flowing from her eyes. The reaction of Issei and the rest of her peerage and also of Sona's of seeing him, were a bit more reserved, but also quite happy. I guess something has happened to me. Where you come from? Sirzex asked. You are gone, Sona stated. You, Sarafal, Azazel, Michael, nearly all the leaders of the three factions, all of you, and millions of others. This caused a look of horror by everyone present. I am also glad to see you again, Azazel-sama, Raynor, greeted him. Even if you are not really exactly the same. To everyone's surprise, she wrapped her arms around him as well and drew Azazel into a hug, before releasing him and giving him one, a bit sly, smile. Darien was sure, this Raynor and the Issei of their group were the same he had been watching in a life and death fight as he had been observing multiple alternate realities 2 months ago, who had survived her own death by bounding part of her soul and spirit to Issei Hyodo. Besides that, this particular Raynor here was also the one he had seen on the astral plane together with Faust only a short time later. Now she was sitting in front of him in flesh and blood again, and easily 100 times stronger than before. Even without telepathic powers, it wouldn't be hard to figure out what had happened. He could feel the energy of the enemy in her. It was clear who had been responsible for her resurrection. But she was not the only one. Sitting right next to Raynor, right between her and Issei Hyodo, was a young human girl who had the presence of the same energy inside her. There was also a clear connection between her and the fallen angel. But that didn't mean that either of them was on the side of the Dark Order, as he knew. XXX. Like Darien found out a short time later, Raynor's attempt to bound her soul to Issei had not been a unique event in the multiverse. In fact, she was only one of many versions of herself he had seen across the realities, who had tried this, in the same or similar situations, and in some cases succeeded. He had in fact actually a short interaction with another disembodied spirit version of here not so long ago during his scouting of realities. That version was, well, let's say less open-minded than this one here. Still, for a line of reasons he felt the need to intervene with the events of that world back then. But that matter was an issue for another time. XXX. So it is you, Raynor, turned to the Guardian leader. I see this is what you look like in person. Darien, that was the name Faust called you, right? Yes, I remember our meeting, he replied. As I see you have refused Faust's offer. Even with the way you have regained your physical body, he stated. You met this guy before? Their Issei asked her surprised. You remember how I first found out that Faust and these other Dark Order lords are at war with another group of super beings when I was still a bodiless spirit? She questioned. It was him I met on this day. Of course I have only seen him as a faceless phantom. I have to say he is quite cute in person, don't you agree? Not as cute as you or Lord Azazel of course. Issei only grinned at her antics. Much to his surprise, he had also seen another face here, one that he had not expected, at least not at this place and especially with this people. Murayama. He said. Hey Issei. Well, nice to see you. Or to meet you for the first time. This is kind of confusing, isn't it? She greeted him. Issei noticed that something was quite definitely off with her aura. It is nice to see you as well, he stated. It is just. What has happened to you? And why are you even here? Now, to put it short, I was dying. But you saved me. Well, your other self did, and this here is the result, she answered. If you want I will explain it all to you. But first you should tell us all about your own story. That is the reason we are here after all. XXXXXXX. Now they all had been listening to the story. Not only had the lords been targeting the universe the new arrivals came from, as they had feared. As they heard now, Ahriman, the darkness, the force that the lords were following, had manifested himself in the future of that particular timeline. A war had happened that cost millions of lives. And that was not even everything. Ultimately, Ahriman's presence had retreated from their universe, but that was not the end. So you see the supernatural world in our reality is lying in shambles, Sona, the one who had arrived with their visitor, explained to them. We hope that we will be allowed to stay in your world. They had listened to the entire story. It was quite simple and quite complicated at the same time. They were refugees. The three factions of their reality had been decimated to the point that they were for the most part only a handful of survivors, even more than they had originally been. They, or at least the devils and fallen angels, wanted to settle themselves in their world. We both would win from this, Sona stated. We would gain a new home and you would gain more members to raise the number of our races. Even if we are practically copies of people who already exist. Wait, Sona. You are telling us that the reason you have to leave your world, in the end, are actually the humans? Rias asked incredulous. Issei's home dimension. It was a remote place on a small planetoid, some distance away from Earth. For the moment it was a temporary retreat for a very powerful being. It wasn't the dimensional gap where she had originally lived, far from it. But for the moment it would do. Ophis sensed that someone had right now appeared at her temporary homestead. And she was quite surprised, something that didn't happen often to a being like her, when she was suddenly standing face to face with herself. In opposite to regular creatures, Ophis was actually, in some sense, the same being in all the different universes. She had, however, the habit to manifest herself in physical form in many different realities at the same time. The many offices that existed in the alternate versions of their reality were so in fact all parts of a greater whole. No, the two versions of Ophis were standing in front of and looking at each other with the same emotionless expression. Why are you here? The native manifestation asked her double. It became necessary, the other Ophis replied. The chance to defeat Great Red no longer exists in the foreseeable future. You will know everything when we have merged. I see, Ophis stated. Without any further words, the two manifestations of the entity moved closer together and finally fused into one body. As this happened, the already vast immortal mind of the present incarnation of Ophis was being flooded with the memories of her slightly older incarnation of herself. Ophis remembered how the events that happened in the other timeline and the war that was going to take place in it. Most of what she saw, given by itself, the deaths, the destruction and chaos on the mortal plane, all of it, would be nothing for her to even feel concerned about. It would not even have been enough to actually distract her, even for a moment, from her own goal to remove Great Red from the dimensional gap. Not in the slightest. While she would have registered it, of course. She would even have admitted, at some level, that the loss of so much life was a tragedy. Even if her practically emotionless mind could probably not truly grasp just how much of a tragedy it was. But it wouldn't have truly concerned her, not really. This were the matters of other beings, while she had her own. And Ophis was an ancient, immortal and practically almighty entity. The matters she cared about were her own goals and concerns. Normally at least. But under all the memories she had just absorbed, there was one part that caught even her mind. One horrifying picture that caused even her to freeze. What she saw was a short glimpse at the force that had truly been responsible for the events in the other timeline, the force that was standing behind the group of entities known as the Lords. She saw a small glimpse of what was waiting for all of them beyond all known realities. And she felt something rising up inside of her, something what she had never known in her eons of existence. It was an emotion. It was fear. A few weeks ago, surrender now, fallen angel, the exorcist declared. Release this man from your clutches, and prepare to face your judgment. A good joke, exorcist bitch, the fallen replied with a grin on her face. You really think you can beat me? Behind them, a young man was sitting on a bed and was watching their fight intensely. None of the two fighters were using weapons. This, however, was not the truly remarkable thing. No, it was that both the exorcist and the fallen angel were only wearing bras and panties for the fight that Issei was watching right now. It will end just like the last time, the fallen angel stated smugly. You will be lying beaten to my feet once again. And when I am finished with you, my beloved will have his way with you once again. That is the true reason you come always back, isn't it? She asked knowingly. You just like the feeling of his dick inside you, don't you? You are very naughty, for a servant of the church. The chestnut-haired exorcist had a deep blush on her face. But then she retorted. You are one to talk, fallen angel. As if you have never lost before. And as I remember, whenever you lose, you seem all too happy every time to receive your punishment that you got for corrupting an innocent man. Oh yes, he is so very innocent, Raynor remarked mockingly with a grin on her face and a side look at Issei. He has sure shown us how innocent he is during the last nights, right? Well, it seems that we are both naughty girls then, she commented. The exorcist and the fallen angel, aka Irina and Raynor, continued their mock battle, while Issei was watching them gleefully. He could barely wait to see the outcome for this time. It was something that they were doing for a few weeks now. The winner was always decided by pure coincidence and whatever mood they were in. With other words, winner was whoever happened to be on top when they decided to quit it, and start with the next part of their game. When the fallen angel, aka Raynor, won, she was usually having their shared boyfriend, aka the man she had corrupted, having his way with the exorcist girl and letting him fuck her hard in every way possible, something that the exorcist however actually seemed to greatly enjoy every time, and then she normally joined in. Whenever the exorcist, aka Irina, came out on top, she spent some time purifying the unfortunate young man from the fallen angel's corruption, with her own body, in a very special act. And afterwards she and the man were together punishing the fallen for her sins. Quite ironically, however, the fallen angel seemed to enjoy her punishments just as much every time. In this moment the door was opened, and Asia entered the room. What she saw as she stepped inside was the sight of her three friends. Irina was kneeling, bent over the side of the bed, with Issei-kun standing directly behind her. He had his left arm wrapped around Irina's upper body, fondling her breasts, while he was fucking her from behind. Raynor was right next to them. Issei's other hand was between the fallen angel's legs and his fingers, as it looked, moving inside her pussy. As Asia came one step closer, she noticed that Issei's penis was actually inside Irina's butt. And going by her loud moans and the way her fingers crawled themselves into the bedsheets, the chestnut-haired exorcist seemed to really like it. For a short moment a picture of herself doing these things with Issei flashed through Asia's mind. Issei-kun, she said quietly. As they turned around they in turn saw that the small blonde girl was completely naked. Asia? He asked surprised. XXX on her way there. As she was passing the corridors of the old mansion, that was serving as their base and in some cases, their home, Asia had already heard loud noise coming from Zenovia's room. She had a good idea what her blue-haired exorcist friend was doing and with who of course. The same thing Issei-kun was doing with Raynor-sama and Irina nearly every night in the last weeks. As she passed the room, she noticed that the door was actually standing a little open. What Asia saw, as she took a short look inside, was exactly what she had expected to see. On her bed, Zenovia was sitting naked right on top of her boyfriend Kiba, who had obviously come over for a visit this evening, like he often did in the last week, and she was riding him very hard and fast. Asia could actually see her breasts bouncing up and down while she moved, and let out a mixture of shouts and moans. Oh yes, Yudo-kun, she called out. Yes. Asia closed the door. She believed the two hadn't heard her, and even if they did, the two would probably not hold it against her. For all she knew they might actually invite her to watch them the next time. They all were more than willing to admit that Issei's behavior, not to mention the fallen angel's mindset, had started to rub off on the rest of their group. What Asia didn't know was that one of the reasons Zenovia had decided to invite her boyfriend over to have sex with him here in her room of their makeshift HQ, and intentionally leave the door open, was that she was always hearing the loud noise coming from Irina's, Raynor's or Issei's rooms, and she didn't want to be left too far behind by her friends. Kiba, despite being, as Rias had once put it, a gentleman, was still a young boy and so gladly agreed to his girlfriend's offer. Another girl who was in a bit of a quandary, Asia knew, was Murayama. Like most of the female students of Kuo Academy, she had a greater crush on Kiba. On the other side, she admitted, she had also come to like and even respect Issei, ever since he had saved her life and she had joined his team. And there was of course Ravel Phoenix, who was always trying to be close to him for the same reason. Raynor had already, of course, told all three of the girls openly, that she didn't had a problem with it, if they wanted to join Issei's harem, and cheerfully welcomed them. Much to Murayama's and Asia's embarrassment. Ravel, being a devil, on the other seemed to be far more easily getting into the idea. But she told them that, as the fourth heir of the Phoenix clan, she couldn't just give her virginity to Issei, even when she would have liked to, at least not without asking her parents what they thought about the idea of her joining Issei's harem. But since he was both, the security and on top of that the leader of the local guardian group, that the Devil Society already wanted to establish contacts with, she had no doubt that they would agree. And then she would definitely join them, she had already declared. Raynor, Murayama and even Asia, had only rolled their eyes at that statement. Typical devils, they all thought. XXX The irony was, that they were actually supposed to be a group of interdimensional defenders, but right now they were acting more like a bunch hormonal sex-crazed teenagers. In all honesty however, by what they had heard, they were not really much worse than some other subgroups of the Guardians. There were for example some of the former members of the team known as the X-Men. Their team leader Scott Summers had, as they were told, once been married with both Jean Grey and her twin clone Madeline and left one for the other, before having an affair with yet another woman and leaving her as well. Yet all three women were part of his subgroup and there were rumors that, now in the present, he had sex with all three of them from time to time. Both Jean Grey twins were also said to be two of the, obviously many, lovers of the man named Logan or Wolverine, and Madeline was also said to having a relationship with at least one other team member. And there was of course the former Russian priest and exorcist Grigory Rasputin, whose reputation about women was legendary, even back when he was still mortal. Another example would be the former Prince Lelouch aka the former Revolutionary Zero, who was also said to have relations with at least two, maybe even three of his teammates from his home universe. There were also some other members who, according to what they heard, had entire harems or in some cases simply hundreds of lovers over the time. Even about Darien there were some of these stories. Of course they had no way to know how much about all of this was actually true. But if even half of it was, they were at least not that much out of line compared to the other groups. XXX all three of them, Raynor the Fallen Angel, Irina the Exorcist and Issei, were staring in surprise at the former nun, who they just noticed had entered the room. I want to do it with you too Issei-kun, Asia exclaimed nervously. Ah, I see our little nun wants to have her share as well, Raynor grinned. So that is it Asia. You want Issei-kun's dick too? Why yes, Asia replied meekly. Well, when I think about it, since you were a nun, haven't you made a vow of chastity? You are a bad holy maiden, right? Raynor teased her. Suddenly Asia grinned. Yes, I am a very bad holy maiden, she said now, just as theatrically as the fallen angel did. Isn't that what you want to hear Lady Raynor? She asked. Lady Raynor. The fallen angel remarked smirking. You are only still calling me that to taunt me, aren't you? Especially since we are sitting here right now, about to be getting fucked side by side. Asia gave her only a now friendly smile in return. But she didn't even deny it. If you say so Lady Raynor. I see, you are really bad, Raynor smiled back. And you truly want to join our little game. Okay. Since you are a bad holy maiden, who are we to deny you this? The fallen angel stated smugly, right Irina? Oh no. Now the fallen angel is actually corrupting this innocent holy maiden as well, the exorcist girl called out, in an exaggerated tone that made it practically impossible to believe she was serious. Have you no shame at all? She asked playfully. Great words from a girl who had gladly taken it in the ass just a minute ago, and obviously enjoyed every moment of it, Raynor remarked. As if you hadn't done the same thing just 2 days ago, Irina quipped. That only shows how much you have corrupted me. Don't blame your own perverted desires on me. You had been a naughty girl right from the start. You only didn't want to admit it. She grinned. Our little arrangement here had only helped you to open up yourself. Maybe, Irina admitted with a light smile. Now come Asia, Raynor told her. Don't let Issei-kun wait. The former nun made one step forward. Then the fallen angel laid a hand around her shoulder, draw her closer and laid her on the bed, right in front of them. Please Issei-kun, do it with me too, she said quietly to him, spreading her legs. Okay Asia-chan, he told her and positioned himself before her. She gasped a little as he grabbed her small breasts with his hands and started to knead them. I love you. Just like Raynor and Irina, he whispered to her as he slowly pushed his member inside her. XXXXXXX Kuo, alternate universe, now their group had just separated from the strange man named Zelrech. And they were about to leave Kuo, since it was obvious that their first breach was caused by his presence and so not a threat. Zelrech claimed he had some of his own business to take care of. Something that Gariel actually seemed to be quite happy about. Whatever happened in the past, it was clear that this two didn't get along well with each other. Issei took one last look at the other version of his hometown, before they would leave. He had a feeling that this was only the first of many other Kuos he would get to see. Then he and their trio of fallen angels formed transport circles beneath them and they teleported away, in the direction where they had detected the other dimensional breaches. So they were leaving this version of Kuo behind. XXXXXXX moments later they reappeared somewhere in the same area where the crash landing of the spaceship had happened several days before. The same region that was the source of the other two-dimensional breaches. Good. Our next target is a few miles in that direction, Gariel announced, while pointing with a finger. You know, I think this little trip is actually quite nice, Issei mentioned. Why do you think that? Irina asked him. Is that a question? I am here with a few of the hottest girls I know, he replied. And we are all by ourselves out here. Imagine what we can all do together, as soon as we are finished with our job here. Imagine, boobs as far as the eye can see. He grinned. Asia blushed a little at Issei's perverted antic, remembering all too well what they had already been doing during the last weeks. 3 of you are already my girlfriends. But my harem is still not complete. Remember my promise, he announced. I will have my way with all of you, he declared. Gariel and Calawarner exchanged a short look. But they only smiled after a short moment. Like I told you, Gariel mentioned, we probably won't say no. That means if you actually make a move on us and not just talk about it, of course. Right, Calawarner. They were both fallen angels. And female fallen were naturally both attractive and very seductive, and also quite open about sex in their culture. What separated Gariel from practically all others of her kind, was that she had not fallen due to her sins, even if she knew she had committed more than her good share of them later, or born this way, how most of the fallen angels living today were. But she had given up her godly protection and become a fallen willingly out of convenience. But she had as well had, as she admitted, adapted quite quickly to that part of the nature of her new species. If she was honest, she had in fact adapted quite well to it. If she remembered, Alec had back then actually quite happy about this particular change in her, she thought a bit naughtily. But all that was back then, before he had changed into what he had been in the end. Now thinking back at this time's only hurt. In the last time, however, she knew she had another man by her side. One who cared about her, who was doing everything to protect her and the others. Who was actually kindhearted and able to forgive, who would never become like this, even if she had to share him with a few others, and he was a complete pervert. Not that she really particularly disliked this fact. She thought. She remembered how Issei was always admiring her body, with a light smirk on her face. Of course there was the little detail that he was a 16-year-old human teenager, even if he had turned immortal now, and she was a centuries-old being. But who cared about that under supernatural beings, right? Yes, she had definitely become a fallen angel, in every sense of the word. But for now they had other matters to deal with. We will see about that. But first we have a job to do, she stated firmly. XXXXXXX at the same time, not too far away, the other group, that consisted of the native Issei, Irina, Zenobia and the counterpart of Kiba Yudo of this world. But while they were currently in the same general area, both teams were still far away from actually meeting each other. At least for the moment. But that could change soon. How much longer do you think it will be, Iyasa-kun? Native Irina asked the boy, who in another world went by the name Yuto Kiba, a bit impatiently. Here, he was still carrying his birth name. This version of him also never became a devil. It has to be somewhere in this area, Irina, the blonde-haired sword fighter answered. As you remember, we agreed to come here because we're the ones closest to this place, native Zenobia reminded her sternly. And like I remember, you had been all too eager to go when you heard we had a new task. Then I haven't known that we would only be wandering through these woods for days without finding anything, native Irina pouted a bit. I had actually hoped for a bit of action, not this. I know what you mean. But what shall we do? It is also part of the job, their Zenobia replied. Issei, their Issei, was actually watching their exchange with a light smile. Aside from everything else, he was truly glad that he had met Irina again 2 months ago. He was truly glad to have her in his life again. XXX This version of Issei Hyodo was quite different from many of his counterparts across the multiverse. For once, he wasn't an openly declared pervert and he didn't dream about having a harem. No, instead his dream was to become a hero. That and to be, as some would call it, a champion of humanity. He was completely aware that his race was being used, exploited and generally looked down on by the members of the 3 factions, even the angels to some degree. And this was something he intended to change. By showing the entire world that humanity could be great, by setting an example. But of course also by fighting for them, and for the rest of the world. By defending it from threats. That was also one of the reasons he had decided to accept Irina's offer to join their little group. Despite that they were working for the church, he could tell that they had similar goals like himself, to protect humanity and beware the peace. Their first and so far only, greater mission together, had been the battle against the fallen angel leader Kokobiel 2 months ago, as they had temporarily teamed up with the sisters of 2 of the Devil Kings to protect them and their hometown Kuo from Kokobiel's attack and to keep him from triggering a new great war. Before that, Issei, for his part, mostly had to deal with smaller matters involving stray devils, fallen angels or the devils of Kuo themselves. This single battle against one of the Grigori leaders however had brought their entire team, but Issei especially, since he was the one who dealt the killing blow against Kokobiel, fame across the entire supernatural world. A short time later they also played a role in stopping the assault of the terror organization known as Chaos Brigade against the peace meeting between the 3 factions. There however, with the leadership of all 3 races present, they were only a few fighters out of many. Still they managed to prove themselves against a large number of dangerous enemies and proved their abilities even more in front of the faction leaders themselves. Since then however they had been mostly sitting around and either spend their time either training or doing nothing and hanging around in Kuo town. The church had insisted that they would be staying in the area of Kuo in case another attack happened. After all they had already 2 in only a few weeks. But so far nothing happened. That was also the reason they all had been glad when the church had sent them here, as they had heard about the strange sightings in this region. But so far this mission had turned out to be not much more than a glorified camping trip. Something that Issei didn't know yet was that this would change very soon. XXXXXXX several miles away, the crashed spaceship. At the large burned-out clearing in the forest. Caused by the crash, less than a week ago, a single being was in this moment flying towards the maroon spaceship. The figure had the appearance of a quite attractive-looking, dark-haired young man, with bat-like wings. It was the pure-blooded devil Diadora Astaroth, the brother of one of the mouse. Or at least the body was. And just like his counterpart, he was also a member of Chaos Brigade in this world. But the creature controlling his body in this moment, as he entered the insides of the spaceship, was someone completely else. Welcome back, Phantom, a voice greeted him after he had landed. Commander Karen, the being replied. Tell me, how did your recon mission go? Better than I ever expected, my lord, the creature in Diadora's body responded. I originally only intended to take over some higher members of this Devil Society, to gather information about them. But as it turned out, the owner of this body also had secret connections to another organization, one that could be very useful for our goals. I see, the commander stated. Tell me more. The organization as a whole is called the Chaos Brigade. A silly name, I know. But what I found so far is promising. The part of the organization that seems the most interesting for us is actually called the Hero Faction. Good. Extract all the useful information you can find and take it with you. Your favorite body is here for you, as you see. He gestured to the form of a man, with short brown hair in clothes identical to Karen's, standing motionless at the other side of the room. The man wasn't moving a limb and whose face was completely expressionless. The reason was simply that the man was only a puppet made of flesh, without a mind of its own, created especially to be the being called Phantom's living vessel. A black fog-like substance started to flow out of Diadora. This was Phantom's true self, his essence. It was floating through the room and then finally gathering itself around the form of the brown-haired man and then entered motionless the body, that in the same moment started to come to life. Before the transfer was even fully complete, Commander Karen drew the blade he was carrying at his side and stabbed it through Diadora's chest. Before the devil even came fully back to his senses, he broke down dying. The SH leader watched with some bit of satisfaction how the disgusting creature perished. XXX Phantom was one of the special agents, serving the Dark Order, that the entire Shah Empire was part of. While not part of Shah himself, a race of modified humans, he was currently serving the Dark Order as part of their empire. The creature going by codename Phantom, was actually a member of a race of body and formless beings, that normally existed outside of the physical world. But similar like the Shah himself, his nature had been changed a bit to serve the goals of the Dark Order better, and of course to bring him closer to perfection. What was in some sense actually one and the same, since bringing the universe and its creature closer to perfection, was one of the greatest goals of the Dark Order and their creations, the Shah. XXX when Karen, Strike Fleet Commander of the SHA Empire, which in itself was only one of the many sub-factions of the Dark Order, had heard the reports about the state of this world they were stranded on, he had been appalled. Their non-enhanced genetic brothers, as he realized very quickly, had in secret been subjugated by so-called supernatural races. Especially the race known in this world as the Devils, and to some lesser degree also the fallen angels and even the angels of heaven, were using the humans as nothing but slaves, convenient tools and playthings. It was a situation he intended to change. Of course they had no actual orders for a mission on this planet or in this reality. They were not even supposed to be here. But that didn't really matter to him. He would not let things be like they are. He could easily justify his actions, since he was still following the codex of their race, the codex given to them by the Dark Order and their masters, the Lords, to improve the universe by destroying what was unworthy. And beside that, he was pretty sure that the Lords by now were aware of where he and his crew were and what they were doing. Others might underestimate their power, but he was not one of them. The Lords were more than gods after all, and they valued initiative. Since they had so far done nothing to contact them or interfere with his plans, he took their silence as approval. Of course, it was not so much that he felt true sympathy for these humans of this world. If they were weak enough, in body and mind, to be enslaved like that without even noticing, then it was their rightful fate. No, it was a question of pride. They were ultimately still part of the same species after all, despite all their changes and enhancements. The human race in this reality, like in any other, would live in freedom and power, or not at all, he thought. XXX Karen, closely followed by the creature he had called Phantom, was moving through the corridors of his crashed flagship, until they arrived in the central hall, where the most part of his soldiers was assembled in this moment. Under them was also the group that had been taking care of the family of intruders a few hours earlier. During the last battle, their ship had been separated from the rest of his fleet. Of his main crew of originally 45 soldiers, 32 had survived the last battle and the following crash on this remote version of Earth. 32 warriors and himself. Every single one of them with superhuman and supernatural powers. But still, it was far from enough to directly take on an entire world full of supernatural beings. But who said that they had to do that? Thanks to the information his subordinates had gathered during the last days, they had by now a pretty good picture of the inner workings of the supernatural world of this reality. They knew where they needed to strike to cause the greatest possible damage to their enemies, and about possible allies in their mission. The information that Phantom had gotten out of the mind of this devil named Diadora Astaroth was especially useful. A group of 3 warriors, 2 men and a woman, was stepping forward, out of the crowd. None of them was looking older than 35 or maybe 40. No Shaw ever would. Thanks to the changes and improvements the Dark Order had made on their genetic makeup when they created their race out of regular humans, they had been practically given physical immortality. None of them would ever age beyond their mid-30s, except if they specifically wanted to. They were immune to most kind of diseases. Aside from physical injuries, they could technically live forever. But of course they had been created as warriors for the great cause, to live and die for their holy goals of recreating the universe. So dying in battle was a very possible outcome for their lives. And some of them, at least these three, would. You three have volunteered and were chosen to play the key role in our new mission on this world, Karen addressed them. You three, my friends, have been given honor to be chosen as the tool that will cause our genetic brothers in this dimension to finally open their eyes and stand up against their supernatural oppressors and take the place in their world that is meant for them by destiny, he declared loudly. None of these three would survive their task. All of them knew this, including them. This was part of the plan from the beginning. But they had still volunteered. They would die for the cause, like so many before and like many would afterwards. You will not survive your task, he reminded the three soldiers. No, instead you will die by our own hand. You will wear the face of the enemy and use it to light up the fire that burns in humanity, even here. You will bath in the blood of our brethren, starting the process of weeding out the weak and making them aware of the enemy right in their midst at the same time. Humanity will rise again, here in this world here as in so many others, and with them we, the Shah will, he shouted at the gathering of his crew. He was answered by roaring applause from his usually very disciplined crew. Soon this three soldiers would undergo a procedure to completely change their genetical structure. This was another small thing to thank this creature named Diadora for. His body supplied them with perfect samples of the cells of these devil race. The three chosen warriors would die, a small sacrifice for a world. But all the carnage they would be causing until then, would not be credited to them, but to the devils. Yes, Karen thought, he would make sure that the humanity in this universe would take their rightful place in this world, even if he had to slaughter half of them to reach it. XXXXXXX. It was a few hours later at the same day. It was slowly starting to get dark. The small group of inexperienced guardians was by now coming closer to the source of the second-dimensional breach their organization had detected. It is very close, Gabriel stated. Probably right down that hill. She pointed in the direction. XXX. What they found a minute later was a surprise, even to them. There, sitting in front of a small campfire and lying against a tree, was a woman who was obviously the source of the dimensional breach. The reason they were so sure about this was quite simply. The woman was quite obviously not human. She was also not a devil, angel, yokai or a member of any other supernatural species. No, she was something completely else, alien. The woman had purple skin, pointed ears and goldish yellow eyes with black pupils. None of them could sense any sort of supernatural energy coming from her, at least none that they could detect. But it was, alone because of her appearance, quite certain that she wasn't a regular inhabitant of this world. And they were just standing there, right before her. The alien woman looked equally surprised as them. And then it happened. She activated her own powers. They all suddenly actually felt a strange power coming from her, of a sort they had never sensed before. Nearly at the same moment, a greenish shimmering energy was appearing in the air before them, and forming itself into what looked like transparent, but solid, objects, weapons, blades and clubs, made of green light, hovering in the air in front of them. Wait, Gabriel told her. We don't want to harm you. Thanks to their magic, that allowed them to understand all sorts of languages, they were actually able to talk with the woman. We just want to know what a member of the Green Lantern Corps is doing here, and in this world. The Green Lantern Corps? Irina questioned. She vaguely remembered that this organization had once been mentioned during their training as one of the other groups with the purpose of defending the many existing universes. How do you know what I am? The female alien asked them distrustful. We are members of a group that is active in several universes. Our organization is usually called the Guardians. As she heard this, the alien visibly relaxed. So you have found me, she said. I had not expected our allies to locate me so quickly. The weapons the woman had conjured disappeared. Allies? Issei asked in surprise. This being here knew about the Guardians. He looked at Gariel, who however seemed just as confused as he was. XXXXXXX many miles away. Back at Kuo, on a small hill, just outside the town border, two beings were having a conversation. One of them was the mysterious eccentric vampire being they had met earlier, named Zelrech. The other was not actually physically present, but was there as a mental projection, in form of a transparent nearly featureless silhouette. This other was one of the lords of the Dark Order called Faust. Don't you find this situation just as interesting as I do, my friend? The Phantom asked him. An interesting situation that might cause the death of millions and maybe the destruction of entire races, Zelrech commented dryly. Isn't that the case with nearly all truly important matters? Faust asked him cynically. It seems very often, they are, the vampire admitted. Aren't you curious how your young unknowing protege will hold himself? Faust inquired. It is kind of ironic, isn't it? That his opponents have in many senses similar goals like himself. They both want the rise of humanity. However, I think their ideas about it would be quite different, wouldn't you agree? As different as night and day, Zelrech responded. One wants humanity to rise to freedom and grace, the other to dominance over this world. Well, we will see which side will win out, right? Faust stated. I trust you to keep our mutual agreement and leave it to the young ones to settle this matter between themselves. Otherwise we might decide to get involved ourselves. And you know the possible consequences of this. XXXXXXX Issei and his team were now actually sitting at the campfire, together with the alien woman, who had introduced herself to them as Sylar Lal, a Green Lantern. And she had explained to them how she had landed in this world, during a mission. So you have been part of the search for the creature named Galad, Gariel stated, together with some of our own teams. And that is the reason you know about our organization. The Green Lantern nodded. Yes, she replied. During the last months, there had been several attacks on several remote places on offside planets in one of the galaxies under the protection of the Green Lantern Corps. It had never been greater settlements that had been attacked. Despite that, however, hundreds of innocent beings had already died and we had no idea what kind of being might be responsible for the attacks. The closest thing you would probably compare it with by what I know of Earth culture, would be terror assaults. This is a version of Earth I am on, right? The alien woman asked now, a bit unsure. It is, Issei answered. The alien woman had now calmed down, was in a more peaceful mood, and he had come to take a closer look at her. He admitted, despite her clearly non-human looks, she was actually quite attractive. At least she was a member of a humanoid race. And despite her unusual purple skin, he noticed that she had a nice bust. But it is quite different from the Earth you are used to, believe me, Gariel added. What happened then? Raynor wanted to know. Well, by what I knew it was then, when members of your organization contacted my leaders and offered them help and information about this being we were dealing with. By what we had been told, it was a member of a group that they were only calling the Lords who had disappeared a long time ago and now seemed to have shown up again. So we had accepted their offer to work together to find and stop this creature before it could grow more powerful and harm even more people. Gariel, wasn't this the mission Darien and the others went to 2 months ago? Irina questioned. Yes, the same mission that caused them to be absent while you decided to run off and deal with Crossel on your own. Raynor remarked. And nearly got all of us killed. Calawarner added, smirking. Gariel winced a little as she was once again reminded of her latest mess up. Yes, she confirmed. What happened then? She asked the Green Lantern named Sylar. How came you to be stranded here? As it turned out, our teams were not the only ones looking for this creature. Sylar answered. On our journey group we were confronted by a group of beings that your people were calling the Shah. Them. Gariel said. Of course. Gariel, who or what are the Shah? Issei asked. That is something I would like to know as well, Raynor stated. The Shah. We have told you about the civilizations that are influenced or controlled by the Dark Order, Gariel responded. They are one of them, and possible the most dangerous. Simply explained, they are a race of genetically modified humans, that were created and indoctrinated by the Dark Order to serve as their soldiers and enforcers. The term SHA stands for superhuman augmentations. They are generally fanatically devoted to the Dark Order and their philosophy. They all have supernatural abilities and powers, at the very least rivaling a high-level exorcist of the church of our world. So they are a race of evil superhumans. Great. Raynor commented sardonically. Just exactly what I always wanted to deal with. Yes, that is exactly how your people we had been working with had described them as well, Sylar told them. A battle broke out between my group, your team, that was present, and their fleet. I don't even know how it ended. Only that we had heavy losses. During the fighting, one of their ships was thrown through a hyperspace gate, and I along with them. Gariel's gaze now snapped back to the alien woman. Are you telling us that they are here as well, in this world? She asked her concerned. An entire ship full of them. Well, I cannot be quite sure if they had survived their crash. But yes, if they did, they should be here in this world. The greatest dimensional breach, Gariel murmured. This is worse than we had ever expected. Gariel, Issei asked. If they are here, on this planet, then this entire world is in danger, she told him. XXXXXXX. A short time later, the exorcist team, consisting of Issei's and the others' counterparts, was now seeing something that caused their originally quiet mood to make a turn to the worst. They were standing in front of the burned remains of an entire slaughtered family, who had been labeled as "intruders" and killed, just because they came too close to the crashed ship of the Shah. Who could have done this? The exorcist Irina asked in shock. It seems that the church was right, exorcist Zenobia stated. There is supernatural activity in this area. What makes you so sure? Exorcist Issei asked. I mean, could this not simply be the word of some serial killer or something? It wasn't, Kiba's counterpart told him. Don't you feel the leftovers of supernatural energy around here? Despite being the most powerful, mostly thanks to his boosted gear, Issei was also the least experienced member of their group. While the others had actually years of actual training as exorcists, he only had months. As he concentrated his own powers more, he could sense it as well. Yes, there is a trace, he said. But it is somehow strange. I am sure, it was at least no devil or fallen angel who did this. Actually, Didrake. He asked his version of the red dragon. I know what you think, partner. This energy signature feels almost human. But it is far too strong for any kind of regular human to come from, Didrake confirmed his thoughts. Maybe it was a sacred gear user, exorcist Zenobia offered. In that case it would be the energy of the sacred gear we would be sensing, not that of the wielder, exorcist Issei responded. Then maybe we are dealing with a powerful stray exorcist or maybe a mage, Kiba said. Whoever it is, exorcist Irina declared, we will find him. We won't let anyone get away with something like this. Issei nodded. We know now that there is an actual threat here in this area, exorcist Issei stated. We will search this entire region if we have to, and we will find them and stop them from doing something like this again. XXXXXXX. A few hours later it had become night. Issei and his guardian group had sat down for the evening and were about to go to sleep. Unknown to them, not so far away from them, their exorcist counterparts who were doing the same thing. Both groups were sleeping in small tents. While the exorcist had brought them along, however, the guardian group had simply conjured theirs with magic. They had not located the Shah yet or even decided how to continue from here on. Taking on an entire crew of the Dark Order's genetically enhanced warriors with their small group alone, would very likely simply be too much for them. So the question was, should they actually try to find the enemy by themselves, or was it better to return and ask for help first? But that was a question left for tomorrow. Most of their team had already gone to bed. At this moment Gariel, who was still up, had just made a decision. It was however one that had nothing to do with the current threat, but instead with another matter that was going through her head for the last week. She was walking right to their makeshift camp, right in the direction of Issei's sleeping place. And where do you think you're going, Gariel? She heard Raynor's voice coming from the side, sounding quite amused. As she turned around she saw that actually not all of the others were sleeping yet. In fact, both Raynor and Irina were still quite awake and sitting inside the tent the fallen angel had chosen for herself, looking at her. As if you don't exactly know that, Gariel replied smiling. After all, you two are doing the same thing nearly every night. XXXXXXX. Around the same time, in another part of that world, Cao Cao, the leader of the subgroup of Chaos Brigade called the Hero Faction, had received a mysterious message and an offer for an alliance, coming from a group he had never heard of, calling themselves the Shah. Issei's group. Currently in the newest parallel world they had traveled to. Issei was lying in his tent. Hopefully by tomorrow they would manage to find this Shah that Gabriel had been talking about and give their location to the Guardians' headquarters. They actually had a discussion about how to go on from here about an hour ago. Should they contact headquarters and ask for reinforcements? Or should they try to confront the Shah by themselves? Like Gabriel, most of them thought that this was a really stupid idea. Raynor for her part had made her opinion on the matter quite clear. A few hours earlier. Let me make this clear, she had stated, I am a fighter for the Grigori, mainly. My duty here is to help you explore other realities, like this one, and bring information about them back to Lord Azazel. That and to maintain a connection to the Guardians that you two are part of, Issei-kun and Gabriel. Not to fight cosmic threats to these worlds. Like that group of engineered superhumans here. I am not a fucking superhero, and not a supervillain either. I might have done some things I regret now, she said with a side glance at Asia, but I have done them for the sake of the fallen angels, and only that. And to draw Azazel's attention, she added silently. I hate to admit it, but Raynor-chan has a point, Irina stated. The church wanted me and Xenovia here for a similar reason. Still, if these Shah are a danger for the people on this world, I feel that we should help them. I feel the same way, Asia told them. What part of we are badly outnumbered, did you two not understand? Raynor responded. We can help them far better when we just wait for reinforcements and then let them do the job. You know. The experts, the guys who have actual experience with these Shahs. In opposite to what some people might claim, Raynor was not a coward. A coward wouldn't have willingly accepted a mission that required her to work completely alone in devil territory. A coward wouldn't have been walking around right under the nose of the enemy, observing a sacred gear user, and then later contacted and killed him with said enemy close by, as much as she by now regretted the last part. But that didn't mean that she was suicidal enough to charge headfirst to an enemy they knew nothing about, while being outnumbered at least 5-1. I have to say I agree with Gabriel and Raynor. Diedrag said, loud for all to hear. While my pride as a dragon certainly told me to face this enemy, we just don't know enough about this group. That doesn't exactly sound like the battle-hungry Red Dragon Emperor of legend, Calawarner commented dryly. I had once run foolishly into a fight, fallen angel. Do you know what happened? He responded. I ended up being sealed into this sacred gear here. Rushing into a battle without knowing the full picture can easily lead to defeat. Irina was hearing a voice coming from her own sword. No matter how powerful you are. It seems Merlin agrees with you, she stated, after a short look at her Excalibur, that was now radiating a mysterious glow, as always when she or Xenovia contacted the soul shards that were bounded to their weapons. But what if they kill someone while we are waiting? Asia questioned. Okay. We do it like we had proposed. We just locate them at first and then send their location to headquarters. And let them deal with them. When we see that someone is in direct danger, we will interfere ourselves, Issei declared. Does everyone agree with this? I for my part have sworn to protect the universe, the Green Lantern named Sylar told them. But this isn't my home universe. I agree. Unless we realize that something dangerous is going to happen, we will wait. Raynor gritted her teeth. Damn it. Being a cold-hearted bitch was so much easier. Here you see what you have done to me, Issei-kun, she told him jokingly. He only smiled at her warmly at her comment. XXXXXXX. Now thinking back about this little exchange, he was smiling once again. It were such small things, when he truly realized how much Raynor, Yuma, had changed for the better. And he was happy to have given her a second chance. He knew that several of his counterparts across the multiverse couldn't bring themselves to do that. A few actually allowed Rias Grimori to kill her. He admitted the thought made him sick. He, right now could not even comprehend of not forgiving her. Knowing people like Crossel, Kokobiel or Fried Selzen, he knew now what true evil was. And he knew Raynor wasn't like them. He also knew that this versions of him ended up traumatized for years to come because of all what happened. While he actually had her around, had the chance to talk things out and come to terms with everything. So in opposite to these doubles of him, he clearly had drawn the better lot. Being who he was, Issei of course also used his time to fantasize a bit about his other female teammates. But as he suddenly heard the entrance of the tent being opened, he realized that he had a visitor. Gariel, what are you doing here? He asked. She was in her civilian form. He noticed, instead of the leathern battle gear that she materialized when they were on missions, the equivalent of what her Yuma form was to Raynor. I am only here so we can do what you have been talking about for months, she said innocently. Issei, really, a girl comes into your tent at night and you actually ask her what she wants? Really, what kind of a pervert are you? She asked him suggestively. For a few moments he was only staring at her. Maybe I should make it more easy for you, she told him and began to open her blouse, revealing her quite impressive breasts to him, that were still covered in a black bra. Now? She asked him. I see, he smiled. You are really serious about this? Yes, I am. Issei, during the last few months, I have come to care about you deeply, she responded. And I know that you will always be there for me. Even after all the shit that you had found out about what I have done, you are still holding on to me. Of course I do. That is all in the past, right? And I know that you are really trying to make up for it. Besides, I have forgiven Raynor, right? So how could I blame you? But you love Raynor, she pointed out. I do, he said, but I care about you as well. You have always been there for me. You have always helped me from the beginning. You were my friend. Without you I would have been lost. Before he even fully realized it, Gariel already moved forward, pressed her body against his and started to kiss him. Don't say something like that, she told him. It was my task to help you. But you just did it, all on your own, she said while they were kissing. She opened her bra and freed her breasts completely. Issei, of course, grabbed them instantly and started to knead and fondle them. That caused her to moan a bit. She reached out to Issei's trousers, opened them and stroked his member, before taking it out. He was already hard and she could see that what the other girls had said about his size was truly not an understatement. Gariel knew she was joining a harem that already consisted of 3 current members. And a few more candidates in the waiting. But right now she didn't care about this at all. She knew some people would probably say she lacked pride as a woman to actually willingly become a member of a harem. Gariel saw that differently. At least he cared about every single one of them and showed it, unlike, him. There were much worse things than sharing a man, a boy, with others. She would know that. She had allowed one man to use and manipulate her for his own agenda, and turn her into a murderer. But Issei had still accepted her after finding out about her past. Even after she, with one bullheaded move to defeat Alec, had nearly gotten them all killed, he and the others didn't hold it against her. She lifted up her skirt and pulled down her panties, before she positioned herself above Issei's lap and his dick. Her quite disheveled brown hair was falling around her face and over her shoulders, while she was looking at him with her big round violet eyes. A quite erotic sight, as Issei thought. Now fuck me, she whispered to him. Don't hold anything back. She impaled herself on him with one quick move. Issei happily complied and fucked her hard, while she was sitting on his lap. He felt Gariel's walls clenching around him as he moved inside her vagina. For a moment the thought crossed his mind that that bastard Crossel had done the same with her, had been at the same place, felt the same thing. The very idea unsettled him somewhat. But he would never treat her like that guy did, Issei told himself. Hey, are you two done with each other soon? They heard a voice coming from just outside the tent. Others are waiting out here for their turn and are getting more and more hornier. Calawarner. Issei asked in surprise. The other fallen angel opened the zipper of the entrance and stepped inside. Yes, I have been waiting here for a while now. I wanted to make a visit to you this evening. But as it turned out, Gariel had the same idea and was there first, she explained. Don't tell me you have fallen in love with me too, he said a bit perplexed. Fallen in love? No, it isn't as serious with me, she replied. I am just curious, she admitted with a smirk. I have heard the other girls talk about you sometimes. How good you have become from doing it with them nearly every day, and how big you are. So I just want to try out your dick, she said grinning, while opening a jacket and her bra and letting her large breasts hanging out. Beside that, she whispered quietly to him, while she lifted up her miniskirt and slipped out of her panties, I really like doing it with young boys. It makes me feel attractive, as if myself were still a young girl. Issei, after hearing her confession, grew even harder, just like Calawarner had intended with her words, and much to Gariel's joy, who was still riding him. You slut, she commented between moans. She was however not really in a strong position with her argument, since she still had Issei's penis inside her. Are you really in a position to talk? Calawarner asked. I have to say, you might not have fallen through sin, but you are certainly living up to it. Tell me, how is it to be ravished by a boy less than a tenth your age? Does it feel good? Issei, Gariel said to him. Can you still go on? She asked. You can count on it, he said, while he thrust it into her once more, causing another moan. Then could you do me a favor? Could you fuck this little bitch so hard that she won't walk straight tomorrow? She asked him with a grin, that was surprisingly, mirrored by Calawarner herself. Issei smiled. This was just going great, better than he had even dreamed about. He admitted he was the most luckiest pervert on the face of the planet, even if he technically wasn't on his planet right now. He instantly pulled out of Gariel, stood up and walked over to Calawarner. She got a look at his size and was by far not disappointed. Then Issei pulled her to himself. He roughly kneaded her breasts with his left hand and grabbed her ass with the other. So big, he whispered, looking at her boobs. Strange. I just wanted to say the same thing, Calawarner commented, taking his dick in her hand and caressing his balls with the other. At the same time, Issei let one of his fingers gliding into her pussy. Why, you realized that I said this on purpose, right? This is exactly what I had intended, Calawarner pointed out. Issei pushed her on the ground, on all four, and positioned himself behind her. Of course, he replied, and now you are getting what you have asked for. He thrust into her deeply with one stroke. Calawarner cried out a bit from the sudden intrusion. I am sorry. I hope this didn't hurt too much, he whispered to her. But I promised Gariel to be rough with you and, well, this is what you wanted. Do you like it? He asked, while he thrust it inside her hard a few more times. Why yes, she called out in pleasure. Issei. Please, Gariel said to him. She took a place right next to him and he pushed his fingers inside her pussy, while he had his other arm around Calawarner's shoulders and was squeezing her oversized breasts, as he was fucking her from behind. XXX outside, the rest of their small camp was in fact still awake. They were all sitting side by side, in a short distance away. Is this normal with you? Sylar asked. She was sitting just next to Raynor, Irina and Asia. They were all hearing the noises coming from Issei's tent. For the most part, yes, Irina replied. But normally it is us, who Issei-kun is doing it with, Asia stated. In this moment they heard loud moaning and then a shout, obviously coming from Calawarner, out of the tent. All of you at once? Sylar asked. Well, not always. But quite often, yes, Irina answered, blushing. It seems however that Gariel wants to join our little harem as well, Raynor commented. And Calawarner wants to have a turn too as it seems. So we decided to leave him to them for this night. I have to say the mating practices seem to be quite different than on the Earth I know about, the alien woman said. Well, I admit, we might not exactly be standard, Raynor replied. But at least in the supernatural world, there are many not different from us. But I will not be expected to join this harem of yours as well, just because I am traveling with you, right? Or will I? Sylar questioned. For a split second the fallen angel looked at her in open surprise about her question. Until she remembered that the woman had probably knows only a superficial knowledge of Earth's customs, and the Earth in question was not even theirs. Then she broke out into wild laughter. That is rich, Raynor exclaimed. No. Unless of course you want to, then we can talk about it. She giggled. Irina and Asia were laughing as well, even if they were trying to hold herself back, especially Asia. That was a completely justified question, the alien said, her face in a deeper shade of purple than a moment before. How I am supposed to know about this perverted customs in your world? This caused all of them, especially Raynor, only to laugh even harder. They heard another scream coming from Calawarner, mixed with a moan that sounded like it was from Gariel. XXX. A few seconds after she had orgasmed with a loud cry, Issei felt himself tightening and came inside Calawarner and then let her sink to the ground. He and both fallen angels were breathing heavily. It seems you have learned a bit with Raynor and the others, Calawarner panted. I hope this isn't over yet, she said, looking at his now limb member. I hope the same, Gariel stated. After all, we still need to continue with what we were doing. Just give me a few moments, he replied. Believe me, I don't think about stopping yet. He grinned. After around 20 minutes, they continued for another round, until they decided it was time to quit, since they needed to sleep, to be ready for the next day. XXXXXXX. The next morning they continued on their way where they had detected the source of the greatest dimensional breach, the place where they knew they would find the Shah. A short time later, they began to sense supernatural energies in the area. They had found them. But they realized soon that the Shah weren't the only ones they had found. They saw it as they were looking down from a small hill. Below them was a clearing, obviously created by the impact of the object they saw in its center, a spaceship, just like Gariel and the Green Lantern had said. But another thing surprised them even more than that. They had found the Shah. But as it looked, they were already in a fight with someone else, if you could call it that. And the people they were fighting against were nobody else than Issei Hyodo, Irina Shido, Zenobia Quarta and Kiba Yuto. Or rather their versions from this reality. What the hell? Issei stated. It seems our doubles have actually found them before us, Irina said. This have to be ourselves from this world. Yours and Issei's at least, Raynor commented. Who would have thought that your own counterparts were looking for them as well? So these are the Shah, she stated, looking at the Exorcist group's opponents. But this down there are not only them, Gariel said. She recognized it nearly instantly, because unlike the others, she had actually seen Shah warriors before. They saw that she was right. At least 5 of the opponents, the native Issei and his team were fighting, were actually sacred gear users. XXXXXXX 20 minutes before it was a short time earlier, that the Exorcist group had found what they were looking for. Now they were only standing there with open mouths. Issei-kun, is that what I think it is? Exorcist Irina asked, completely perplexed. A spaceship? A UFO? This is just. Exorcist Zenobia murmured. It seems so, Kiba said quietly, as well not quite believing what he saw. Does that mean we are dealing with aliens? Exorcist Zenobia questioned. It seems the church had a good reason to send us here, Exorcist Issei said. Then suddenly, they were sensing the foreign presences that were coming from everywhere around them. They had been surrounded, and they had not even realized it until now. The church, you say? They heard a voice coming from the woods behind them. Thank you for giving us that information. As they turned around, they saw that it was a man, maybe in his early 30s, with brown hair. He certainly didn't look like an alien. That was for sure. He was closely followed by a half-dozen others. They all were wearing identical looking, black and red colored leathers clothes, uniforms, they realized. Who are you? Exorcist Zenobia asked. This is a complicated story, and I fear it would take too much time to explain it all to you now, one of the strangers, a dark-haired young woman, stated. What you should know, however, is that we have orders to eliminate everybody who breaches our parameter. In other words, you have come too close, so you have to die. She raised her hand, and sparks of electricity began suddenly to spread through her fingers. A moment later she fired lightning at them from her bare hands. Irina and Zenobia used their holy swords to try to block it and succeeded, barely. But that didn't mean that the attack didn't cause some damage. They had both visible burns on their clothes and also their skin. Exorcist Issei could feel anger coming up inside him as he saw the state of his 2 friends. He materialized both his boosted gear and summoned the sword Ascalon, that had been given to him by Michael, at the peace meeting. He also activated his other power. And he was ready to use them against his opponents. But in the next moment something else happened. A lock opened on the metal structure, that they had already concluded was a crashed spaceship, and a line of figures came flying out. Wait, One of them addressed the fighters who had surrounded the exorcists. The one who spoke was a tall man, who seemed to be their leader. As I told you, our offer to work together would lead to interesting results, he said to a dark-haired young man, who was closest to him. You see, the church has already sent someone after us, and given us a few interesting candidates in the process. You talk as if it is an accomplishment to have the church sending someone after you, the young man replied. It is, if you prove that you can deal with them easily, the leader of the strangers replied. Or even better, if you are able to draw them to your side. And these four certainly have potential. He turned to Exorcist Issei and his friends. May I introduce myself? I am Karen, commander of the Shah Empire. As you have certainly guessed, I and my warriors are not from this world. But we are still human. Only with some small, modifications. If you are human, how can you not be from this world? Kiba's double asked. Karen only smiled. In simple words, we come, as you would call it, from another dimension, another reality. Our ancestors came indeed from Earth, but not the Earth of this world, he explained. They were looking at the man, watching for any sign that he was joking. We came here by accident, as you can probably guess by the state of our ship. But we have seen and are appalled by the state humanity is in this reality, Karen stated. You have to know what he is talking about, right? As servants of the church, the young man next to him added. You must have seen how humanity is being subjugated and exploited for their own end by supernatural beings of all factions. How they were being held down by them. And who are you? Exorcist Zenobia asked him. Oh right. I forgot. May I introduce myself? He said. I am Cao Cao, the leader of the hero faction. And these are Georg, Jean, he pointed to a tall dark-haired man with glasses and then at the only woman in his team, a young girl with blonde hair, Siegfried and Heracles, he gestured to the last members. They are descendants of the real heroes of their names and like myself, they want to have humanity break free from their shackles and rise again, he ended his small speech. Those words certainly hit a nerve on Issei. He knew exactly what they were talking about. Actually, he agreed with much of it. But that didn't mean that this people here were the good guys. Tell me, the family we have found slaughtered a few miles from here. Were you responsible for this? He wanted to know. The frown on Karen's and Cao Cao's faces were barely visible, but it was there. So you know about this, Karen commented. I guess that means we won't come to an agreement. With murderers like you. Never. Exorcist Kiba replied. We might agree with some of what you say, but we will never agree with that. How unlucky. For both of us, Karen answered sadly. Especially for you. Kill them, he ordered his men. Unless of course, you have still use for them. He turned to his ally. No, I agree with your decision, Cao Cao said, while materializing his sacred gear, that had the form of a spear. They are just too much of a liability right now, for the plan you had suggested. Sadly, in any other case, I would have gladly taken the time to convince them of our cause. Karen fired a beam of energy at them from his bare hand. Issei lifted up Ascalon, trying to block it and concentrated all his power. But the strength of the attack was incredible. His sacred gear gave him a boost and he was finally able to send the blast into another direction. His friends, he saw, were already struggling with some of Karen's soldiers, who had charged them at the same moment their leader had started the fight. Cao Cao, he noticed, just gave his comrades a nod, and the members of the hero faction joined them as well. Exorcist Issei knew they had no chance. They were completely and hopelessly outmatched. He knew that since Karen's first attack. If his warriors had only half the power that their commander did. In this moment Cao Cao appeared right next to him. He had moved so fast that Issei's eyes could barely follow him. His spear was raised up and now glowing with a powerful energy, ready to strike his opponent down. There was no time to turn around and use Ascalon to block it. And even then, he wasn't sure if even the Holy Sword would have been able to block this kind of weapon was that. Issei was barely able to avoid the blow. He could sense, if it had hit him, it would have most likely been his end. I have of course heard of you Issei Hyodo, Cao Cao stated. Your victory over Kokobiel is known to everyone after all. I had actually hoped to recruit you. Not if you are willingly cooperating with a group who kills innocent people and children, Exorcist Issei replied. Karen contacted me and offered us a plan that might enable us to reach our goals, Cao Cao shrugged. We are working with him to reach that goal, and for as long as it is promising for our group. That is all. That is all, Exorcist Issei repeated angrily. Yes, Cao Cao responded, attempting another strike. Exorcist Issei concentrated all of his powers into his blade and activated his balance breaker. He exchanged a few blows with his opponent and his spear. But he could see on Cao Cao's expression that he was still not completely serious, while Issei was giving all he had. This weapon here, if you want to know, is the true Longinus, the spear that ended the life of Jesus Christ, the strongest of all Longinus gears, Cao Cao told him with a smile on his face. Even with all the power you possess, you have no chance. Meanwhile Karen was now facing Exorcist Kiba. His appearance had somehow changed. It looked as if his entire body had turned into metal, while his eyes now glowed in a crimson red. He and his warriors clearly possessed supernatural powers, very strong ones. Karen himself seemed to be able to change the structure of his body at will, not to mention shoot very powerful blasts from his hands. But he didn't see that, even one of them used a sacred gear or something similar. It came all from themselves. Issei remembered Karen's words. Was it truly possible to modify humans to possess powers like this? Just from birth and training. Irina and Zenobia were fighting two of the sacred gear users, who followed Cao Cao. Most of the others were just standing around them, not getting involved in the fight. Yes, you are truly worthy, Karen said. It is a shame that we need to get rid of you. Exorcist Issei knew that was the only reason they were still alive. It seemed their leaders wanted a good fight. But their opponents could always just change their minds and finish them off in full force. They needed to get out of here. In the next moment Cao Cao suddenly did something unexpected. His sacred gear, that he so far had only used at short range, suddenly formed a long blade of light, that reached over the entire distance between them and was still extending. Exorcist Issei's senses told him in the last split second to try to dodge, before the light blade, that cut right through his scale armor, was stabbed into his shoulder. Without his instincts, it would have pierced his heart instead. XXXXXXX. Now they were watching how Issei's, Irina's, Zenobia's and Kiba's doubles were still desperately trying to hold their own. The only reason they were still standing was that only a small number of their opponents were actually fighting them, they all saw. The only good thing was, that so far nobody seemed to have noticed them, since they were all concentrating on the ongoing fight. They are as good as dead, Raynor stated. They are, Gabriel confirmed, and this is not even all of the crew they are facing. We need to save them, Issei said. You are serious about this? Raynor questioned. Yes. This are basically me, Irina, Zenobia and Kiba down there. We cannot just let them die, and you know that, he added, seeing her expression. Gabriel, can you prepare a portal to bring us out of here, at the right moment we have them? He asked. Yes. But that is still no guarantee that we won't get killed before we have the chance to use it, she replied. The next moment they saw Issei's double getting stabbed. Damn, it looks as if I actually am a fucking hero now, Raynor commented. XXX Issei, who had just been stabbed by the true Longinus light blade, went to his knees. His balance breaker armor vanished around him. If he had been a devil or another dark creature, he would have already been dead. The spear would have annihilated him. But as what he was, a human and a servant of the church, he was able to survive at least the contact. It was a good fight Issei Hyodo, but you have underestimated both me and my weapon, Cao Cao told him. The next moment, however, something happened that nobody would have expected. Suddenly another Issei Hyodo and Irina Shido, accompanied by 3 fallen angels and a strange alien woman, surrounded by a green light, came flying on the battlefield. This Issei activated his own balance breaker, while the fallen angels showed their 6 and in the other 2 cases, 4 wings. For a second, even Cao Cao could only stare with an open mouth at what he saw. The entire group attacked at once, directed at both the Shah and the members of the hero faction. Issei's dragon shot, accompanied by a volley of powerful light spears, forced the fighters who had surrounded the exorcist group to draw back. The purple-skinned alien meanwhile materialized weapons and large objects out of thin air, that forced the remaining opponents to draw back. Issei had reached his wounded double. He was closely flanked by Raynor and Gariel, who was carrying Asia. What the hell? That was all that the other Issei could say when he saw who had just rescued him. Kalawarner and Irina had at the same time helped the native Irina and Zenobia to free themselves from their opponents, before the completely surprised Shaw and Sacred Gear users even fully knew how to react. Issei, on the other hand, sent out another dragon shot in the direction of Karen, who had stopped fighting Kiba's double and instead turned his attention to them. Gariel, can you activate the portal? He asked. The other came just running to them. Yes, she answered. Good. Then let's get out here, he said, as it formed itself in the air before them. Come with us, he said to Irina's double, who was still completely shocked by what was just happening, and by this person who looked exactly like Issei. A second later, after they all had quickly moved through the portal, they were back in the home dimension of the Guardians, in front of the same large complex where they had been training for 2 weeks. Where are we? Exorcist Zenobia asked confused. At a safe haven, Gariel answered. We will explain everything to you. But first, let's get inside. Asia, would you please help Issei's double? She didn't needed to be told and had in fact already been moving to do that as the fallen angel had told her. She raised her hand, activated her sacred gear, and after a few moments the wound disappeared. The energy coming from the Longinus spear seemed to have stalled the reaction a bit, but it had worked. Twilight healing, Exorcist Zenobia commented. Don't tell me you are Ossia Argento. I am, but not the one you are thinking about, she said quietly, looking at the two Isseis and Irina's. We have other things to worry about right now, Raynor stated. For example, what to do about those 2 groups of lunatics in your world. Our world, you mean? Exorcist Issei asked. But as soon as they entered the entrance hall, they were faced with an even greater surprise. They had expected to meet some of the other guardians from the other teams, or maybe some of their leaders. Instead, before them was standing a large group, consisting of yet a third Issei and Irina, another Raynor and Asia, 2 Rias Gramoris and Sona Citres with several peerage members, of that several were here twice and several other people. They could also see 2 Zenobias and Kibas. Then meant also 3 of him present. Beside that they could also see Searsex Lucifer, Seraphal and Azazel standing under the group. What the hell is going on here? At the side of the hall, they noticed Darian and next to him was Murayama. And I thought this situation could not get any more insane, the exorcist Issei they had just brought along from his homeworld stated. You, the new Issei, who they didn't know yet, suddenly hissed as he saw one of their group. Several of the others were also looking angry or even reaching to their weapons. They were actually the same group who had arrived in Kuo from a future universe a short time ago. But surprisingly, it was not Raynor, Kalawarner or even one of the counterparts they had taken along, who caused this reaction. It was Gariel. By your reaction, I guess you have met another version of me, she questioned. And the meeting didn't exactly go well. You can say that. Future, Issei responded grimly. I apologize for all my counterpart might have done to you, she said. But I assure you, I won't do the same. I can guarantee you, Gariel is a good friend and has always been trustworthy, Issei told them. Whatever one of her other selves did, she is not the same. He saw that his double and the others seemed to have calmed down. Issei asked himself what this other Gariel might have done, especially since his counterpart's version of Raynor was standing right next to him and he didn't seem to mind at all. What is this anyway? Were you already looking to replace us with other versions of us? The mission was not that dangerous, Raynor commented sarcastically. It is nice to know that I am just as snarky in this world as in ours, right Issei-kun, her double remarked. Kalawarner, it's good to see you again, she greeted the counterpart of her old friend, and good to know that you are alive in this world. Yay, sure, the other fallen angel replied a bit insecure. This isn't a joke, Darian spoke up. These people here came traveling from one of the other realities, the future of that universe to be precise. There is a lot you should talk with them about. XXXXXXX somewhere far away, in yet another universe, that had nothing to do with the events so far, things in the town of Kuo were going on as usual. The human population was living their lives, not aware at all that their town was actually being controlled by devils. Like they didn't know about the other supernatural beings either. Here, In this moment, a unsuspiciously looking man was standing on a sidewalk close to the park and watching a certain place, that happened to be a comic and video shop. Nobody would have known that this man was actually a supernatural being. But not a devil, but something else, something related but different. A sort of creature that had no been seen in this world for centuries and even longer in many other realities. He saw that his target had just left the shop. This target was one, quite regular, not to say average, looking girl, a human girl, a girl with the name Rias, her friend, who had closely followed her, just called out her name as she had left the building. I told you Akano, leave me alone, she said irritated. This Rias was quite different from nearly all of her dimensional counterparts. Instead of red, her hair was brown. Her figure was different. Or, to say it plainly, her breasts were so small that she barely had any to speak of. She was wearing glasses. And the most glaring difference, she was human. But at a closer look, her features were clearly the ones of the devil Rias Gremori. This was also the reason that a certain supernatural being was currently watching her, from an unsuspecting distance. Something that would have seriously creeped her out, if she had known about it. Now, what is with you today, Rias? This dimension's version of Akano Himahima, who was obviously getting on her nerves, asked her. In opposite to the girl next to her, she was nearly the same as in most other worlds, a fallen angel hybrid. Is it because you haven't gotten this DVD you wanted? She questioned. Or is it maybe because Issei-kun wasn't paying attention to you? She teasingly said the name of the guy Rias. No, actually both of them had a crush on Akano. I told you to shut up, Rias called out angrily. The man who had been watching them both, followed them walking down the street, and then took another direction. As soon as he had reached an empty alley, he formed a magic circle and transported himself out of the town. XXX he reappeared in an unpopulated area. As soon as he was alone, he dropped his human appearance. Two demonic-looking bat-like wings materialized on his back, very similar to the ones of a devil. But only that. Two small horns had appeared on the sides of his forehead and his fingernails had become long and sharp like talons. Despite not actually being a member of their race, he was looking like the picture of a devil out of literature, quite ironic. Or more likely, it was no wonder. Since, if asked, this being would consider himself to be a true devil, and the ones who were currently carrying the name to be imposters. The creature formed another magic circle, one for communication. Yes. A voice was to hear. Lord Pazuzu, the man, greeted the being on the other end. Ah, Huron, your report, he asked. As suspected, the so-called three factions are indeed weakened in this world, compared to a few centuries ago, or compared to most other realities that were considered as possible targets, the man stated. But this is countered by the existence of several magic and supernatural guilds and also free magicians under the humans, who form a great factor of power. I see. Who would have thought that our most powerful opponent in this universe would be the humans? The being named Pazuzu said somewhat amused. Your final verdict? He asked. The defense of this world as a whole is still strong. Beside that, it would be hard to truly concentrate on our main targets. While they themselves are weaker as in other realities, there is a great risk of the factions of this world forming an alliance once more. As a whole, my verdict is that there are more promising targets out there, Huron stated. Good. I came to the same conclusion, Lord Pazuzu replied. What about the anomalies you have reported? I just come back from observing Subject X02. There is no doubt. The subject being called Rias Gremor, from the Gremor family, is human. But otherwise identical with the devil Rias Gremori. As expected. I guess we know that reason for that by now, right? It is kind of fascinating what these creatures are willing to do, when they think it serves their own end, isn't it? Pazuzu remarked. Should I eliminate her, my lord? While she might not be a member of our degenerated offshoot in this world, we both know that she should have been. And it should be quite easy, Huron offered. But she isn't alone, isn't she? Didn't the report say that she was under the protection of a strong mage? What was his name again? Issei Hyodo, my lord, a magician and sacred gear user. Then let it be. It wouldn't be worth the effort of the risk to yourself, Pazuzu stated. When you have finished your observation, return to our base. As you said, There are more fitting targets out there.